Analog horror. It's horror that's analog. I don't think I need to explain what it is much. You know the big series if you're clicking on this video. Local 58, Gemini Home Entertainment, the Mandela Catalogue, but despite me knowing plenty of series, up until now I'd only fully watched through Local 58, Marble Hornets, and the first season of Monument Mythos. But as I said, until now, because you may have noticed from the title that I've watched 50, that's right, 50 analog horror series, and I'm going to be reviewing all of them. Now, given the sheer amount of what I have to review, don't be surprised if not all of these get the most detailed analyses of what makes them good, bad, or whatnot. I'm mostly going to be given the basic gist of my thoughts. All series will also be linked in the description if I can remember, which hopefully I can. I also will be giving them tiers, ranking them in the tiers of S being my favorites, A being series that I think are very good with the potential to hit S, B being series that I think are good, if not the top of the top, D being series I think are kind of mediocre, not necessarily bad, just really flat, and F being series I just call bad. Keep in mind with every criticism I make, I hope to be somewhat constructive. I understand that many of these series are extremely low budget. Plenty of these are just the result of creative people with no money expressing themselves in a genre that befits those parameters. So I don't intend for most of the criticisms to be like, this looks shit, or this acting is shit, but rather things like writing, style of presentation, pacing, things that anyone can improve on regardless of budget. You do not need to pay yourself to improve as a writer. And of course, no disrespect to the creators, but full respect to the ones I glazed, some of these series I really did love. I'm not going to hold you here any longer, you clicked to see me talk about analog horrors, and I'm going to talk about them. Here we go!
Hello, I'm so worried. There are 5-foot-tall pumpkin people invading the country. They have consumed 99.99% of every United States Americans. Their features include being short, being wide, having pumpkins' foreheads, and wielding 50 caliber rifles. They are known to be extremely dangerous and will kill on sight. The only known remedy is G Fuel, the sponsor of this broadcast. G Fuel provides a boost of energy without the hindrance of sugars, carbohydrates or carbs, allowing anyone to run at the Mach 3 quintillion necessary to escape the pumpkin people. It is also available in tubs or cans for ease of transport, plant-based and vegan-friendly, and can be purchased in over 50 flavors. G Fuel will be your survival. It will be your salvation, though it is full of caffeine, and thus should not be given to those under the age of 18. It should also be drunk responsibly, lest the scent of G Fuel attract the pumpkin people. This man has not drunk it responsibly, and will soon succumb to the effects of his foolish behaviors. If you wish to survive, you should use the link in the description and code BLOODRIKE for 20% off of your order of G Fuel. It may be the apocalypse, but we are still going to make a buck off of you.
Local 58 is the big daddy. Not the granddaddy, because that would be things like Blair Witch Project and Marble Hornets, but the daddy that led to all this we're talking about. Local 58 is a series about a channel called, well, Local 58, the same one mentioned in Candle Cove, that's canon. It's only a few episodes, but each one shows different things that have played on that channel. From an accidental broadcast of a message from the president in case of the United States falling, to footage of someone driving with their GPS active, to even just a cartoon. While it doesn't start the scariest, as you go through them it does set a tone, and while not having a particularly tight narrative across them, has consistent themes of night watching, the moon being dangerous, and what might be lurking in the night sky that we cannot see or understand. Beings beyond our comprehension clearly inhabit the area beyond Earth, and somehow, this station knows about it, it's talking about it. At first it seems as if the station is trying to warn us not to look at the moon, but it does quickly become taken over and starts spreading ideas of dreaming being bad and the moon being good. In other words, dreaming bad, sleeping bad, be awake at night. Local 58 I think is the perfect starting point for an analog horror, and also just a really effective one. Sometimes, the first is just the first because it took the first steps, but other times, something is the first because it did everything right, and that's why it's the first, because other things wanted to be it. And that's what Local 58 is. It's very subtle in its approach, which I think gives it a level of believability that sucks me in. Aside from skywatching, that's cool in every way, but with all that lead up to it, I can forgive the absurdity of the moon disappearing and beaming closer to Earth somehow. Also, it looks great with the fleshy organic stuff. The idea that space itself and what we see in the sky is alive is terrifying, and a great way to inspire a sense of genuine dread. One thing that particularly strikes me is the notion that this being, whatever this is on the moon, lives in the light. It's stated that it lives in the light, the moonlight, but also in a look back, that we send signals through its domain and sending them back. This isn't just some unknowable force on a living moon that moves through the moonlight. No, it's light. All light. The light from the TV, from the computer, the phone you're watching this on probably, the radio signals we convey information through. Whatever Local 58 is, it's always been there. When mankind first looked into the sky and saw the moon, to when we first sent messages across the world, to when TV began being broadcast, it is the light. We can never see anything without being in its domain. You cannot escape no matter if you look away. There are always other receivers. And that phrase, there are no stars in the sky, only eyes, chilling. Strangely enough, the way in which each segment is pretty separate from one another, with the moon tying them together but otherwise being completely unrelated usually, really gives off the idea of how long Local 58 has been around. It has done all these things, changed and altered with the times. It's not strictly analog horror, it's broadcast horror. No matter what we do to change and how we consume entertainment, it will adapt. Easily, the first one to go into S tier, and the first one on the tier list at all. Fuck, man. The Painter is a series about a bunch of VHS tapes that go through horrific murder scenes explaining what happened and then showing you a vaguely disturbing image with a funny little title. This is indeed the fuck toy Corey show. Watching an episode of The Painter can best be described as looking at JPEGs while text describes what's happening and how someone died horribly via having 50 kilos of bratwurst jammed down their throat. Then we found a painting. It's titled Cocksucker Carol, and then it'll just keep doing that. 2 episodes have funny little diagrams show up, one has a 911 call, and those are the most exciting parts. The series tries to be just as gross and disturbing as it can. It's a vehicle for UrbanSPOOK to show off their art skills, and yes, the art is indeed, if not necessarily scary or disturbing, good quality, as long as it's not trying to genuinely pass off as a photograph. But you see, analog horror runs on a few things like storytelling, subtlety, ambience, variety. The Painter has none of that. It's the same thing over and over, with the same droning top 15's chills music in the background, and the subtlety of a show that tells you 4 wounds on a guy's body were full of seminal fluids. This is one of the most disturbing 911 calls of all time. Here is a glimpse of the most violent killers in American history. There's this bit on the security cameras like pretty creepy at first, because like this looks good, you're anticipating what's going to happen. But then things start moving and like, that's not security camera footage, that's drawings. And like, the animation is not terrible, not at all, but it's just that it is a jump scare with an actual jump scare stinger, and that's pretty fucking weird. Analog horror doesn't tend to have actual jump scare, Hollywood jump scare stinger music like sounds in it, but like there's very little to say about The Painter. The most story you can glean is that there's 2 killers. At best I can say maybe it'll end with the person who has these tapes dying or turning out to be one of the killers. This is the first F tier. It did not scare me, it did not keep me engaged, it was just there. And after that, I decided that I'll put the rest of these into a spinny wheel to determine what I watch next. I have never watched Neon Genesis Evangelion, and I don't really have all that much interest, but Midwest Angelica I think is just as enjoyable without the context of the series that it takes inspiration from. This one is the story of a gigantic 60+ kilometer wide thing found in 1985 orbiting Jupiter. Over time it comes to be understood as a living, or perhaps once living thing, that comes to pass Earth in 1999 and drops a chunk of itself into the middle of the United States. This being is called AZ-001, and the thing it drops is AZ-001 Alpha. Other names for this big-ass thing include Azazel and Starkill. The story follows the exploits of Home, the group dedicated to studying and later eradicating AZ-001, and the struggle between what eventually becomes the United States military and this massive extraterrestrial monster. What I think is really interesting, and I think will remain relatively unique as I go through these, is that this is a cosmic horror that is more in the realm of science than the unknowing Lovecraftian nature some of these can be. I'm just going to call this thing Starkill, so Starkill has a lot of stuff that you could describe in Lovecraftian ways, like its implication of being the deluge that ancient civilizations turned into their flood myths, or how it communicates with other pieces of itself through a plane of reality called the Akashic Plane, but they're explained in an attempt to be scientific and logistical. It's all wrapped up in this veneer of that's close enough to how reality might explain it. It has a lot of just really cool ideas and plot points, as well as a strikingly authentic look to it. It just sucks you in, makes you feel like you're in that world, watching footage. Like, you know you're not, but the effort is there. It also has the nuclear bombardment scene, which I think is really cool. Not only is it really funny and entertaining, but it establishes 2 things. One is that mankind is not totally fucked. This can be a problem where things are such a downer and like so obviously we're screwed in some of these series that you just lose interest because you're thinking, well, what's the point? There's no hope we could win, so like, it's all going to end the same way. But this is horror that's built not from the knowledge of there is no hope, but the knowledge of we can win is just really fucking hard. And now there's that tension that exists of will we win? It enforces the terror with the thought that this is what it took to destroy a small chunk of the larger being that's in orbit. If this is what it took to kill just Alpha, what would it take to kill the original whole that Alpha is part of? The military also gets to seem halfway incompetent, with us seeing their contingencies, their plans, and even their continued work after losing their main super soldier military. But the villains get to appear competent too by taking over Delta Base that the intermission season was focused on and built up. And while this does look a bit silly and the visuals of Admiral Nero did take me out a little bit from the story, it was only at the end and the series built up enough goodwill that I don't mind. I love the idea of this found footage approach to an alien invasion and the Thing. I don't know if there's a full movie like this, but there should be one. What I will say is the series never really hit me with a ton of really haunting moments, outside of that one found footage bit that was pretty cool, so the horror part didn't really work for me, but what did was the story and the way it was told. I am invested in this, not because it makes me think and feel fear, but because I feel tension in a narrative sense. I am invested in seeing where the story of Midwest Angelica goes, in seeing who wins, what happens, and it deserves a lot of props for sucking me into the story like that. Solid A tier. Pow! I got so confused with the chronology of this show. Analog Archives, Tempest Universe, short films, nobody gave me a straight answer, so I said fuck it. I'm looking at Channel 7 on its own, it's not even canon anymore apparently. I'll look at Analog Archives later on whenever the spinny wheel gives it to me. I did watch the short film The Interloper that this spun off from, had its moments, and Channel 7 also had its moments. This series is about a channel, Channel 7, that I think has a ton of hijackings and interruptions. There's some alien thing and some infection going around, and government documents got leaked, I think. Look, I'd be lying if I said I understood anything from this series. I tried to catch on, but it was just not working for me. It has an authentic enough look and some good moments. In particular, I really like the one bit where the person recording fast forwards through the episode that they capture on VHS, and there's that eerie silence. As someone who remembers how this feels, and that uneasy feeling when you're alone at night, fast forwarding or reversing a VHS, seeing everything flicker, it's just so much more uncomfortable than with a DVD or Blu-ray. It just skipped past chunks in a jittery way. Here it speeds through on a VHS, and there's that relatable feeling to me invoked of did I see something during that footage? Maybe I didn't. Except here there is something there. There is something visually present. That got me. And there are a handful of other bits I thought were pretty cool, but in general I just wasn't invested in the story. I wasn't sure what was going on, I was confused, I wasn't scared. It's not a bad series, but it wasn't one that got me. I'll have to make it our first D tier. It's just a bit underwhelming. Hey Kids Studio is a currently very short adaptation of the iconic creepypasta Candle Cove. While it's short and has little to it as of now, I really like what this has. A lot of this doesn't try to be scary, it tries to feel authentic to how Candle Cove was described. There's only 3 moments that feel like they're going for horror, and they're pretty effective. The entire Horace Horrible puppet test video was pretty good, with his subtle stopping and the little bit of movement at the end that feels wrong. The actual episode itself is unscary, but that feels like it fits the spirit of Candle Cove. That this series had these unsettling elements, but to most people would have just been like a normal kids show, just this grimy, cheap feeling. This feels cheap, which is weird to say because it's very well done. It manages to capture that feeling of being a cheap, low-budget show in universe, while capturing a passionate, genuine love for what is being made out of universe, if that makes any sense. These puppets are so good looking, this feels like how I imagine Candle Cove would look. And while this doesn't have much for horror, I was entertained thoroughly for the brief time I spent watching it. And it was unsettling at times. The idea that either the characters or just the puppets are alive also means anything in the future with them getting injured will have that darker context, which was, hey, used well in the first and as of recording this video only episode. The silence of the music when the ship gets blasted, it feels like it becomes less of a scripted show and more like Horace Horrible is moving of his own accord to check up on his ship. The blood that leaks out just a little, it feels like Horace is worried, like the ship is in genuine pain because they're both alive. It paints a story where the villains may be victims, forced to play the role of a villain and forced to be injured and harmed every episode, while the so-called heroes may be manipulative, self-absorbed individuals who enjoy being the good guys of the show and causing harm without receiving it because that's what the show wants. I can't say for sure that's what's going on, but it wouldn't be the worst direction for it, and for what little there is of the show, I'm surprised it made me think that much. Also, the skin taker, pretty well done. It's been a while since anything dropped from this series and I couldn't find any details on the creator, but I'd love to see more of this. B tier for a good show that just doesn't have yet enough to go into A tier. I genuinely think if it doubled its length and retained that quality throughout, it could.
Guardian angel, my heart is aflame.
Angel Hare is in almost every way not an analog horror. I don't care. Angel Hare is the story of a man named Jonah who finds a VHS tape of a 6-episode show he really enjoyed as a kid, but finds it's different to what he remembers. Slowly he starts to compare it to his old personally recorded versions of the episode, and begins to unravel forgotten memories of his past. Visually, this show is very charming, with animation that feels like it fits the time period it's implied to be from. There's some great voice acting for the angels in particular. This show does have its unpleasant elements, in the sense of like, what you expect from analog horror. There's plenty of weird glitch moments that are fit into it, or just like dark implications that are never explained, but I don't think need to be. But those all fall to the wayside compared to the main thing I took from this, which was a feeling of pleasantness. Probably the most heartfelt and warm experience I'll have in this video, just given the subject, is when Jonah live streams Angel Hare and finds Gabby is back. He asks if she remembers him and she suddenly becomes more fluid and makes a comment on how happy she is to see him and how well he's grown. The way she reaches out to him and the genuine happiness, it's so good. To me, the themes of the show came down to things like the importance of choice. Jonah spends the whole show asking what he should do like in his youth, but ends it by choosing for himself to let Gabby go instead of blindly following other people. There's themes of change and growth I interpreted, the importance of growing up and not just growing older, and the sheer scale of the internet and the difficulties of trying to help everyone. The implications of what Jonah's father, or maybe stepfather, I'm not sure, must have done, the way the show doesn't explain but implies enough that Gabby manipulated Jonah into getting rid of him with an airtight alibi when he was too young and innocent to understand. It fits as the main unsettling catalyst to Jonah's memories being locked away. Gabby also flooded the place, crazy. But I personally felt like this is part of why she felt she had to leave the first time. She made this choice to help Jonah and it might have cost someone their life, but like, she's still a lovable, kind, motherly figure. The show has no real antagonist, several very likable and entertaining characters. It fills you with a sense of happiness I can't explain. I'm not religious at all, but this show worked for me. My one issue throughout was that some of it felt maybe a bit over-edited, in the sense that like, when you're watching it under the idea of, is this something Jonah edited together, I felt like, why are you adding all these effects and changing the color of the text and tilting it and all that? Now, in universe, you could just take it as Jonah's a weird guy, he likes editing things and that's his comfort in stressful times, maybe he's just artistic. But I think it was just done to make the videos more visual appealing to us, the viewers, and that did take me out a bit, but I guess in context it could be Jonah wants to make it more visually interesting for us, the viewers too. That said, Angel Hare as a series I think doesn't suffer as much from others that could for that. It's less of an analog horror and more of an analog story. I think it's a great example of what could be done with the medium of analog media if we step just a little bit out of the realm of horror and started looking at it from other points of view. Easy S tier. I love this one. Surreal Broadcast is a series about a fictional place in Maine known as Birksaw, and shows through a collection of seemingly unrelated VHS tapes the unraveling story of a town full of bullshit. And I mean crazy bullshit. I mean several meter-long spiders with 3 glowing giant eyes. Surreal Broadcast I definitely felt had a few pretty big problems, but I was relatively well engaged. In terms of issues, there were constant spelling errors, which I can understand. According to the creator, English is not their first language. It did detract, but I understand why it's there and I can forgive it. I also felt there were a lot of times where the recordings went all dark and the colors became evil and the music became evil and it was trying really hard to be scary. And to me, one of the things that's like magical about the genre of analog horror is the ability to turn this seemingly normal into creepy. Midwest Angelica and Local 58 have creepy elements, but it comes from either the cold, sterilized, and emotionless official nature of the former, or the glitchy, out-of-nowhere interruptions of the latter. The first one has the horror of, this is like how the government is explaining things to itself. Like, this is how it goes about, there's no emotion, it's cold, doesn't care about you. And the latter has the fear of like, what if you were watching TV late at night and this just glitched in, this interruption happened. There are other ways to do it, but those are 2 great examples. A lot of Surreal Broadcast feels like it's being all nice and cheery, and then for no reason, the people making the recordings just chose to be creepy. There also felt like there wasn't much terribly unsettling. The series does have its episodes of truly good stuff. The diagram of the tower is really well handled, and I really like the research center episode. And I think, absolutely, this series has some incredibly striking visuals, from the tree people moving around to the iconography of the 3 symbols constantly showing up in the green swirls. It's a very identifiable series that by its noteworthy symbols and such. That's what I think the series did best, honestly. Being striking, not for being scary, but like for being interesting. I wanted to see where the story went, but I will sadly say the lack of a proper ending for the series does make it suffer. I can't blame the creator. I completely understand. They lost motivation and interest in the genre and community, and clearly there's something personal they don't want to share influencing the choice. But it does lower the score overall for the show. I say that definitely this is one worth checking out, and I can understand how some of these moments truly would be terrifying. They just didn't all work for me. But I do really like the lore. It does kind of shoot the show in the foot because it over-explains things, but for me, because I already wasn't scared, it didn't make anything less scary, it just made it more interesting, narratively. It's a good show. I would say it's a solid B tier. It would be creepier if the spelling errors were reframed in the finale as being like the creature's understanding of English, so it's like it's spotty and they're trying to terrify the people of Maine because of the reveal that they feed on fear. So like, if the whole reveal was like, these videos are this way because it's the creatures making them to spread fear, to revive the mother because they feed on fear and the mother's the main villain, that would work for me, but that's just a headcanon. Basswood County. This started with an episode that was simultaneously the most cliche, boring, stereotypical analog horror thing ever, like literally what that one every analog horror video ever is parodying, and then has this WUG segment in the house with a silent jump scare that fucking got me. It was such a mixed bag, but I was interested. But as the series went on, I can't deny it really fell off. By episode 2, it came to my attention the series had one trick. One genuinely creepy and unsettling found footage segments that feel like old recordings of someone with a camera, and then right before the creepy happens, it will abruptly cut to a still PNG frame of the recording with a creepy thing photoshopped in. It made it super obvious how edited in these things were, and it really took away from their creepiness, which is not because they're not creepy. There are some genuinely unsettling facial morphs that really fuck with people's faces and made them uncomfortable, but they were always done in ways that just, like, they had them PNG their way in. This is the punchline, so to speak, of every creepy segment. While there's still some creepy bits like this turnaround in the shower scene in episode 3 that work because of the way they're handled, usually it doesn't. There's a segment that goes from well done found footage to just drawings. The series tries to pass off these as still frames taken from the footage, and there's a segment, there's a radio broadcast that has the claim that they're going to play, quote, the last found footage of the criminal before a stop, unquote, but then it plays, but hold on, it's a radio. It's on screen. That's a radio. How was their footage sent through the radio? These things are small, but when it comes to analog horror, those little problems, and in this case fucking huge problems with the very foundation of the episode premise, do matter. Because of the subtlety of this genre and how it promotes paying attention, and how fear is built up over time as you experience and gather all the little details spread throughout the few minutes of video, these seemingly small things will be very easy to pick up. People are meant to be looking for small details, thus when errors crop up they can break immersion, all that terror and creepiness built up can fade away. Now I don't want to give this an F tier, because there are some few genuinely really solid moments. It has some really good work done to make those warped faces creepy. I do like the premise well enough. I kind of like how unexplained the origins of these things are too. All we get is like a doctor's explanation of how he understands the way they work, the effect they have. But while there's a lot of potential, I have to give it a D tier. It's not bad, it's just kind of, eh. Danger, danger, don't trust the... White Stag Education is one of the shortest ones here, with only a handful of episodes, but man, I actually quite like this one. It didn't have quite enough for me to call it great, but every episode was in some way interesting. I wasn't terribly creeped out by it, but I was very invested, and some of the shots and imagery did make me a bit unsettled. The first 3 episodes were cool, with some laying of the groundwork, and aside from the way the first episode handled the creepy moment, generally a pretty good understanding of how the creepiest parts of these are that they are like the unsettling things talked about in like a casual way. You know, Basswood County has a whole documentary bit that tries to be super scary in the way that stops being, oh, this is scary because it's a documentary on something scary that we're supposed to accept as a normal part of the world, and starts being, oh, this is someone really trying to make a scary documentary for no reason. White Stag kind of has that too, but there's a lot of just that proper understanding that the content of the VHS, not the way that content is framed, tends to be the most important part. And by framed, I don't mean narratively, I mean like visually, contextually. I am taken out when it looks like the person making the VHS decided to fuck around with the footage to make it scarier for no reason. You need to have some powerful force influencing the VHS to be like that, to make that work. Make it seem like it's not that the VHS is creepy because we like interpret it as creepy, but more like the reason we interpret this imagery as creepy is because this creature is connected to the imagery, right? Like how do I explain this? If like a blue VHS turns red, if we interpret red as creepy because the creature creating the red is creepy, and not that we interpret the VHS as creepy because it's red, you know? Okay, I explain that horribly. But those last 2 episodes of White Stag are so good. There's a lot to read into with them. The creepiness feels very intentional in the sense that the last episode uses creepy imagery because it's a training tape for rangers. It wants them to understand the creepiness and the danger of the strangers. And the second last episode only has it because it glitches out at one point. Otherwise, these creepy things are portrayed in very casual ways. It's very fun. I like Rangers Luke and Craig, and the third one's cool too, and I just really do want to see more of this. I'm invested in this story. I really love the usage of the word stranger in Stranger Danger, and how it makes it looks like they mean normal stranger danger, you know? But then you pick up, they're using stranger as a proper noun, not a regular one. It's a name. That's well done. The Stranger Danger song is very good. The usage of an audio cue as the series' main repeating iconography is great. It does a lot to keep it feeling tight and well put together. I think with a few more episodes, this could easily jump to S tier, but for now I'm putting it in A tier because I was very entertained. Okay, Angel Hare was stretching it with analog horror, and I think Soulcorp does that even more. Soulcorp is 3 episodes about a company called Soulcorp that is just full of despicable people in a world where souls are a scientific fact, and they try to exploit the souls of the dead for a buck. It is fucking hysterical. The first and last episodes in particular are hilarious, a great watch that is incredibly amusing. The second one has its moments too, but there's more definitive horror in this. The 3 come together and form a coherent enough trilogy with plenty of dark and creepy implications, a few moments of genuinely good horror, and an incredibly short but fun time. Fuck you, I'm putting this in S tier. It is 3 episodes that don't miss. You don't like that? Too bad, because this is kind of a joke one to put in anyway. It's a gag. CHSS is a very hard one to talk about, partially because it's more of an ARG than just an analog horror, but it's what I consider one of the grandfathers of the genre, and it's an odd one. A lot of the videos contain very little content if you don't go fishing through Mediafire, if you don't check up on the Roy Spencer Twitter connected to it. You'll miss out on a majority of the story and what's going on. But I did do that, so I have an idea what's going on, and I also think it's very cool to have a non-American, non-British show on this list. CHSS is a series about a broadcasting channel, CHSS, that seems to be focused on some psychological elements, looking after people's dreams and generally being there to help. With each episode you learn about the corruption of, like, CHSS. A history of lies and deceit. It's got a very suspicious vibe to it. It's constantly talking about how important you, the viewer, are and how it's always there for you. The story develops well until it ends up completely flipping the entire premise on its head by revealing that the CHSS YouTube channel was untrustworthy, but the actual broadcasting channel was genuinely trying to help and trying to stop this strange entity we've been seeing. A lot of the time, these sort of stories will either have that entity be directly in cahoots with, or eventually take over the related network, but this time it was genuinely opposed by the channel, to the point where it's revealed that CHSS only exists to stop this being, Kantya, the Teufel, who ends up essentially winning in the end. The quote-unquote hero we follow, Roy Spencer, in the second half, gets obliterated. Whether intentional or not, I felt this said something very interesting about how, with the untrustworthiness of the media and governments and how they have cultivated a community of skeptics, at least where I live, I know like most people do not trust the government or white media. It might be different in like America or whatnot, I don't know, I don't care. But when someone from the government or media does genuinely want to help and aid the wider masses, because we are pre-programmed as a society to be skeptical, by the time we might realize it's genuine, it may be too late. That thought was brought to my mind. It's a pretty big problem that I guess I just haven't thought of before. In a world where most people are too cynical to trust who we elect and the media we consume, what happens if those groups genuinely have a reason to and choose to try and help us? How could we tell if it's genuine or some kind of like psyop or whatever? And that genuinely gave me a lot to think about. I also have to admit, this is one of the series on here, but one of the only ones so far that genuinely made me uncomfortable while I was watching it. I can't really point to what did it, but something about how it presented itself and how sometimes it just felt genuine, it made me uncomfortable. I felt anxious and like I wasn't alone. The focus on psychological effects and the delirium of the mind certainly helped that as well. It is a very slow drip feed, I will admit. It takes a bit to get going in terms of the amount of episodes. Not necessarily the runtime, because I think it's only a little over an hour in terms of total length if you want to watch it and don't engage with the ARG part, but it can feel like it takes a long time to get going. It's also heavily reliant on the ARG elements like the Twitter primarily to tell its story. I won't hold that against it too much, but as an analog horror experience, I can understand why a lot of people might not choose to engage with it on the grounds of having to sift through a Twitter profile and suffering the all too well known case of ARG FOMO, where you find an ARG that's already been sold for years and you have nothing to do. But I will happily say, a great story, good horror, and engaging themes and ideas that made me think gets CHS as an S tier. Just like with Local 58, sometimes the reason something is the first is not just because it happens to be the first one that did it, but because it was good enough that everything afterwards wanted to be it.
Douglas's badge in a snowbank covered in blood! You fucking sent them out there to die!
I can't stress how funny this show is in concept. Linkara of Atop the Fourth Wall one day decides, for April Fools, to make an unironic analog horror series inspired by the Vostok Station's 1983 coldest temperature recorded. And the first few episodes are rough, with Hoki acting a hilariously dumb first episode scientist bit that looks straight out of a Channel Awesome sketch, and just generally minimal horror vibes. Then the fourth episode just hits. And then it keeps going, and it comes back around to being genuinely good. I want to say I particularly like that Linkara didn't try to make himself the main star of this. He's in it, sure, and gives a pretty good performance, but he had the restraint to not put himself on the front cover. Winter of 83 has a very interesting concept, and I'd argue genuinely one of the most creative and interesting monsters I've seen so far. A bacterial creature colony that consumes UHF signals and controls snow, moving around and manipulating technology to use audio clips to lure people in and talk to them. Basically recreating their victims' bodies with snow, all while trying to consume us and make us into part of their colony under the misguided belief that it would somehow benefit us. Genuinely really interesting and handled really well, with us only physically seeing the vague idea of them behind the snowman bodies that they create to hide until the last episode. And it looks a bit hokey, but I think the series had built enough goodwill back up for it to not bother me too much. Carl Denby was a very compelling character that I enjoyed following, and I think the biggest strength is the quality of the presentation. It all feels very authentic and the visuals are very well done. Winter of 83 had an inherently difficult roadblock to climb, being as it was made by sentient meme Linkara, but he genuinely put in a lot of work and made something I actually think is a pretty solid analog horror series, with a few genuinely creepy moments, a compelling story behind it, and what would have been a massive letdown of an ending if it wasn't for the final shot, because the ending is just text saying, and then everything was resolved. But then he saved it by adding that little signal hijack after the credits to make it clear that no, they're lying to you. Due to the rough start, I don't think it's an A tier, but it's a solid B tier. It's a good show.
I know what you dread.
Oh shit, this is one of the big boys, one of the lads, the fellas, the progenitors of the tropes. Am I gonna fall in with the herd and say this is one of the best, or will I claim to be a free thinker by falling into the contrarian herd instead and saying it sucks? It's pretty good. Is this a top S tier to me? Absolute GOAT? Personally, no, but I'll get into why. I want to talk about what I do like. The idea of these shadowy figures that are human-like, but sometimes have inhuman proportions, I think plays well into that fear of the unknown. Specifically, the same way the cryptid hilariously called Hat Man plays into it. That feeling of late at night when the lights are out and you open your eyes and you swear in a dimly lit room that someone is there, standing in the corner. Maybe their proportions are a little bit off, but your brain, not knowing what it is, perceives it as a threat that may be a human. You're far away from the light switch, you don't have your phone nearby to illuminate. You just have to rationalize it's a coat, or a trick of the lighting, or part of the curtain that's more illuminated than the rest. But what if it's not? What if there's something, someone? What if there's someone, something there? That is a terrifying concept, and Mandela Catalogue at several points plays into it perfectly. I think it does an amazing job of capturing the innate fear of thinking you see someone or part of someone in the dark, around a corner, in the corner, past the edge of your doorframe or the edge of your bed, the unknown of if someone's there or maybe something supernatural. That is when the series is at its best in my opinion. I also think that the entire concept of these alternates is probably the best I've seen the imposter people concept handled so far, which I guess is why it's so popular in analog horror. This brought it to analog horror first, at least I think it did, and handled it so well that everyone tried to be it. The inability to know if who we're hearing is a person or not, the way they can suddenly change for a brief moment revealing, oh shit, the entire time that person was an alternate and not the real one, can lead to some genuinely good moments of fear. The ability to build tension and dread is strong. That's when this series is at its best. Even the first volume that didn't catch me on first viewing because of the amount of and then it's a PNG moments, on second viewing kind of worked better when I gave it another shot. I think there are some moments of great horror, even in the later volumes that bridge the gap between analog horror and just horror short films, that sometimes have found footage moments where the analog aesthetic takes over again. I really like as well, these alternates are not just mindless monsters. They're not just a hive mind and not just sadistic, they're playfully cruel. They enjoy not just the act of killing people, but they enjoy tormenting them. They do it in the harshest ways they can, which, while not necessarily scary to me, made them entertaining at times. They can be fun to watch. The story I think is a bit all over the place, and I had to rewatch things a few times to catch all the details, but telling a non-linear story that forces the viewer to engage with your work is not a bad idea if you make it interesting enough for people to want to engage with it. Volumes 2, 3, 4, and 5 all have plenty of genuinely scary moments. That said, they are very long. This leads to an issue of accessibility. This is going to sound weird to say, but a long 30-minute video isn't necessarily what I'm looking for in analog horror. Mandela Catalogue does handle it well in my opinion, but by the 5th volume, so I don't at all blame Alex. May I call you Alex, for monetizing their videos. In fact, I'm in complete support of it. However, with how YouTube does it, by not letting creators place ads anymore, it leads to things where Volume 5 has a ton of scary moments that are all ruined by a sudden 15-second unskippable ad drop followed by a 3-minute skippable ad. This isn't necessarily Alex's fault, but it's something I think would be alleviated a bit if the videos were shorter. I don't think they'd be worse for it, they can sometimes feel pretty disjointed anyway, but outside of the bit at the end of Volume 5, which I can't deny got me, there were a few moments that I was getting into until an ad for something I don't care about appeared, right after the in-universe ad that I was interested in because it was part of the episode. What I can say is only kind of more because of Alex is that the religious element didn't do anything for me. They were interesting and I liked reading into them and what they meant, but the innate fear of Satan taking the place of Jesus Christ and writing the Bible himself to make humankind worship him instead of the true God, I'm not feeling it. I am myself not particularly religious, and if I was, it would be towards Chinese religions or even Germanic ones, not anything Abrahamic. So to me, it did make it more interesting and engaging, but the moments where the fear is clearly meant to be drawn from religious iconography and corruption just kind of ended up dragging to me. The animation was cool when it was actually done for the show and not taken from a nativity video, no shade, it's neat, but the horror didn't work for me. Additionally, some shots of live action people over stock footage of the sky shaded funny just look out of place and funny. It took me out of things. At the end of the day though, those aren't inherently deal breakers. I feel that I was genuinely invested in the narrative and sometimes the horror did hit. Mandela Catalogue is in a nebulous position where I can't decide if it's the top of A tier or the bottom of S tier. It has a lot of problems in my opinion, but these problems are not things I can hold against the show. It's not Mandela Catalogue's fault that I'm not Christian, and it's not its fault that YouTube hits it with so many ads when these long volumes get monetized. While I don't think I can put it in S tier, it's more of a yet thing. I think as the story goes on, it could easily hop up. It's at the top of A right now. It could easily jump up. It's on the level of those. I just think it needs that extra push for me to get it across that line. For now, it's going to gatekeep the S tier. Monument Mythos can best be described as a great fucking time. I'm not going to hold you, this one captured my interest, held it, and entertained me for its full 3-season run. Technically, this one could be called 5 shows in one: Monument Mythos, Nixonverse, The Modern Day, House in the Ocean, and the Trinity Death Project, 2 of which were condensed into long episodes of 2 of the others, and 1 of which is kind of just removed and may not be canon anymore. I don't know whether or not Season 3 of Monument Mythos or Modern Day are still canon, but I will count the former and not the latter. Modern Day and Nixonverse I will touch on, but they're mostly spin-offs. Monument Mythos has a great hook, this idea that beneath famous monuments there's something lurking. Monsters and beasts, and while I personally would have preferred in general if they were more unconnected ones instead of just Horned Serpent, Big Crab, Alcatraz, and the Giza Glass Crew. While I did like the story overall, I think it would have piqued my interest even more if it was a case of sometimes there's no overarching connection. Sometimes these creatures just exist and we can't do anything about them. Still, the story itself I really liked. Some people have said it's really confusing, but I didn't have too much trouble keeping up and picking up on what it was putting down. While I wasn't keeping track of all the details perfectly, I understood the general gist. Season 1 and 2 are peak analog horror, if you want to call it horror at all. It has horror moments, but it feels like it commits more to being an analog narrative than just horror. Analog sci-fi? There are so many creative ideas, interesting links between episodes, a narrative worth following, and a payoff that is absolutely batshit insane. Season 3 didn't capture me the same way. It felt like it began to lose the interest of seeing these monuments, and I can't help but feel like there's definitely room to expand this idea with different monuments that may be unconnected. And Elon Musk nearly being responsible for the end of the world is hilarious, but I can't get too mad because the payoff was fantastic. There were some cool scenes, even if the in-universe retconning of Season 2's great ending feel a bit cheap. And if it just jumped to a new universe, like where the characters and monuments we were familiar with ended up after the Great Division, that would have been fine, but no, they had the angel go back in time and undo the ending of Season 2, which, like, it's weird. But the finale was fantastic. It gave a ton of characters a well-deserved rest and a happy ending, and somehow the second truly heartwarming sequence of this video, where I think this show really excels, is the way it does its world building. It feels somehow incredibly authentic, yet so absurd that it's meaningless at the same time. It feels like we're hearing these lines of dialogue and recordings, and that they're real archived audio from important historical figures, saying things in relation to a history that we have not lived. Like we're receiving a window into another reality, and this is the state of it, this is what happened. It keeps sucking you in with new details, and I say that as someone who doesn't fucking know the presidents of the United Zones, but it can be interested in learning this huge overarching history. There are also a few moments of genuinely good horror, just horrific sequences that make you feel uneasy. So it was, despite not being fully horror dedicated in my eyes, more consistently able to evoke that emotion than some of the other more fully analog horror series that are devoted just to being scary. Then there's the spin-offs. Nixonverse is complete nonsense. I love it. It's insanely silly, it's weird as hell, it's disconnected most of the time. It's fantastic in all the weirdest of ways. It makes almost no sense if you don't know in advance what's happening when you watch it, but it also gives us Alcatraz checkmate, so I can't complain. Modern Day, however, just did not hit me the same. It had its good episodes, but there's just a lot of, I don't know, uninteresting sequences, boring storylines. I wasn't engaged most of the time. The acting wasn't up to snuff for me. It stopped being analog. And like with Mandela Catalogue, I want to say I'm not here to say these creators aren't allowed to expand beyond the original genre of analog media. That's okay. I'm just saying it's not my preferred. I think the appeal of Monument Mythos is the limitations of the presentation, how it creatively gets around that and uses unique aesthetics and animations and plays within that sphere of limitation to produce something that could never be the same if it was otherwise done. In limitation, art is produced, and Modern Day I just felt like had a lot of normal footage. It felt like a normal amateur short film series. It didn't strike me at all. I feel like if Monument Mythos was always done like this, it would never have caught on the same way as it did with its completely unique way of presenting things. It was fine, but nothing special. The finale was cool, there was a time loop I think or some shit. It just didn't capture me, man. I don't remember the full story. Anyway, I'm not counting either spin-off to the ranking. I watched them solely because I enjoyed the main series so much. Monument Mythos is an S tier, easily. I think it captured me more than almost any other series so far and had one of the most compelling stories, some of the most striking visuals. This one wasn't originally here, but I stumbled upon it and I have no idea what its actual name actually is if it's not just Unorthodox Kitten. This 6-part miniseries so far of an analog horror is one of the most insane things I've ever seen. Like, if you thought that Monument Mythos having a season finale that portrays the universe being reduced to fragmentary corner worlds was insane, Unorthodox Kitten's second episode shows a fractile existence of infinite expansion, where the bottom stack is our universe, making up one atom of one molecule of one being that is itself one atom of one molecule of a larger being. At the top of this infinitely rising stack, beyond endless timelines and dimensions, exists the setting of this story. Unorthodox Kitten is a series that is painfully up to interpretation, while also having something resembling a fully concrete story. I think understanding this requires at least reading the descriptions, because the general way in which this is portrayed requires context that I think would be hard to give with its approach. All episodes are portrayed with abstract visuals, red and black landscapes with geometric shapes representing at best the shadows of beings that we are watching at any given point. The sheer cosmological scale of this series gives a sense of cosmic horror that I've never experienced to this extent. It's not just saying these things go beyond infinite dimensions, it's the way in which these beings talk about what we interpret as infinite and endless as if they were nothing. We do not exist to them. Mathematics is a virus from their point of view. Our world to them is just data, information. It holds no more meaning to them than the period at the end of this paragraph means to this video. Seeing these entities trying to explain how they interpret things to us is just so interesting. It's like a human explaining our existence to a photograph, but it's happening to us. We're the photograph. I don't generally like to go on and waffle about the artistic this and that of a piece of work, but this is in a way a true piece of art. It's so inherently abstract because of what it is that you can make your own interpretation. All we know as an undeniable fact, I believe, is that these entities, called the painters, exist so far beyond us that we couldn't even comprehend the beings that are incapable of comprehending them. We know there was some kind of battle between a group of deities that desired non-existence and another group of not truly living entities that desired to create concepts and ideas. Narrative structures that endlessly spiraled out infinitely into what we would call reality, and then in less than a single instant the battle was over. Existence no longer existed. Which for me, one way I can interpret it is that it's our entire history, our existence, all we perceived in the highest form, the most truly extant thing that we could call reality, was nothing more than an instant between two endless chronologies of nothingness. I interpret this as us humans creating constructs that created the concepts that underlie our existence, being separate from time that are cyclically related to our being. But their inherent existence was enough that those we could never even known were out there took notice, and thus we were removed. But that's how I took it on first viewing. Maybe on another viewing I'll see it differently. I have already thought of other ways you can interpret this, like looking at the description's narrative again, paints it like a idea of like, you the viewer are a character in this story. You weren't here when it arrived. It being, I think, the painters that exist on such a scale that the only way for their predecessors, which may be humanity, to eliminate them is to render all of reality non-existent. In fact, the second video directly calls out you, the viewer, as painting a masterpiece of non-existence. Perhaps in our hubris in making these painters, the battle caused the deletion of mathematics and reality, ending all of everything. However, from the perspective of the higher entities, even to the painters and us, those seen at the end, those who see us as a cluster of data and not true reality, it was nothing. Turning off all reality, deleting existence itself, it literally did not register to these beings as any more major than how deleting an empty text document on your computer registers to you. This may be their message they sent back to explain to humanity of the past. Perhaps they are able to access the non-existent because from their perspective, we were non-existent in the first place. Maybe they wanted to tell us this, or maybe the painters are telling us this, or trying to explain. Maybe the humans are the painter's error. Or, hey, after this, I went and watched the two hidden videos on the Unorthodox Kitten channel, the first of which seems to imply that it's a video translating how the painters communicate to one another in a way we can understand. But it gives us the idea that the current iteration of painters are the ones plagued with mathematics, with questions. This mathematic virus is in essence what we consider existence. The predecessors aren't humanity, but the painters that made the painters with mathematics. No, hold on, okay. Fourth option, hear me out here. They, as described in some descriptions, are mankind. At some point, we reach a state of infinite transcendent infinity, with the painters being limited to their finite goals from when we made them. The painters beyond all time, space, and all things are composed of the predecessors and the current painters. After all things that we once considered reality in our universe are obliterated from existence, a single painter is left that paints and paints, alone in a single instance of itself. The painters that simply do not know that their instance is just one iteration of an infinite existence with an end as finite as infinity. In our hubris, humanity may continue to exist in essence, but our history doesn't. All we once were, all that led to our existence in our current state is gone. Us today, you watching this video, is gone. Humanity doesn't exist because we become something else. What once we were is not there anymore. I love this shit. This cosmic horror that I may be right, wrong, or partially both in every interpretation about, I don't know, but it lets me think about my own creative ideas on what this is. Unorthodox Kitten is a fascinating channel. Easy S tier for me personally. I'm so glad I stumbled on this. Somnium Dreamviewer, the one that I swear I already watched and they got Mandela affected. This is a currently unfinished story about a company called Somnium Microtechnologies that created Dreamviewer for people to use. This lets people record images of their dreams so they aren't forgotten, but of course it's kinda sus, with people developing hallucinations, recurring dreams of back doors and labyrinthian structures, people vanishing, and a persistent theme of there being one extra person to any given relevant group that nobody acknowledges is actually there. Somnium Dreamviewer is very much in its infancy, but I think it's pretty stinking cool. It does very little wrong, it has solid presentation, good voice acting, and an intriguing mystery and story to it. All I think really lets it down is that there's just not a lot to it. It's very much, as I said, in its infancy, and it's definitely not a fault of the creator themselves. They've said it in their own words, they're one person with no budget and a dream. I wish them all the best, and I think there's a lot of potential here. There are some genuinely super creepy moments and unsettling ideas, and as someone who does have sleeping problems, primarily just a lot of trouble actually getting to sleep, it can take me hours to, and constant issues with nightmare and just the worst shit during the state of hypnopompia, this does hit me in a particular way. I'd say it's a very solid A tier. It's definitely on the lower end of it, but it has more content than stuff like White Stag and Hey Kids, and I think it has a bright future ahead of it. This entry was originally the Wyoming incident, but then I got lost and I had no idea what I was watching and I was confused. I said fuck it and grabbed a different one randomly. This is T.O.E. It's a short series by Dr. Nowhere, and these 3 episodes that exist are currently more so, well, they've been retconned into being just concepts for what will be going forward. Let me reword that. T.O.E. is getting completely remade in a different direction, and so these have basically just become concepts. But as it is, I really like the concept. I think it's an interesting idea of this well-mannered entity that needs humans to be food but doesn't want to be rude about it. It looks creepy, genuinely. The episodes are very well done. I like it. I like to see where it goes in the future. I would talk about the boiled one too, but it's just one episode, so... I feel like T.O.E. I'll give it a B tier. It's really just a lot of points for genuinely being pretty creepy. It didn't do anything wrong. It's short, it's going to get reworked, and I'm interested to see where it goes. The Locust is a really cool design. There's not much to say. The Backrooms are far from the most interesting internet phenomena to me. I like the idea. I think the innate intrigue and terror of just stumbling into an impossible to escape labyrinth through no fault of your own, with no knowledge of what's going on, is inherently creepy, but I just never found liminal spaces that unsettling. The Backrooms found footage video, however, is a certified hood classic of the genre, right up there with Local 58's Contingency, Mandela Catalogue's Overthrown, and No Through Road Episode 1. As the things that, like, most people probably immediately think of when they think of analog horror, this and No Through Road, some people probably more think of when they think of internet found footage, but I still think it's up there. It's a great video, and a great intro to a very interesting series. On one hand, I really didn't care for much of it, and that is to say that the overarching story never captured me. I wasn't very invested in what was often going on, but on the other hand, I prefer this way more than traditional Backrooms lore. Different levels with different monsters with rules and methods of escape, okay fine, but I feel like it over-explains the innate terror of the concept. While this doesn't explain the Backrooms much more beyond, there's a lot of unexplainable stuff, a fungal bacteria thing, and some monsters. It leaves a lot to the imagination. There's a creativity in what's shown that I think goes beyond liminal space horror and more into unsettling dimension warping bullshit. I'm captivated by this version of the Backrooms because it's just so much more interesting. I want to learn more, but I also don't want the intrigue of wanting to know to go away. While I was far from interested in the overall conspiracy thriller aspect because it didn't invest me much, I was very interested in seeing the Backrooms actually being explored. Every new expedition gave us some new, unusual imagery that inspired intrigue and interest. It was cool. Not to mention the production value of this is insane. A 16-year-old managed to pull off with clever animation tricks, motion capture, and good usage of filters, an almost photorealistic feel. For the first, I want to say 2 or 3 videos, I almost thought it was actual footage. It was only like a few unusual things that cloned me off to the idea it wasn't, and that's stuff you really need to look for. And the fact that the series was interesting enough that I was looking closely enough to spot that kind of stuff made it feel, oh man, it's genuinely really good. Most people won't notice this is animated because it looks so good. The bacteria also are very good designs. I think Wendigoon explained it the best. In the same way that the Backrooms are akin to an alien's attempt to replicate human structures without understanding the why behind the what, the bacteria look like an alien's attempt to replicate a human being without understanding the why behind the what. He didn't explain it that way, that's an Australian's translation of an American's words. The Backrooms are fascinating in this interpretation, and the series does a lot right to make this by far the most I've cared about them across the internet. I'd have to give it an A tier. It'd be able to go higher if the conspiracy government stuff interests me a bit more. Red Sun Archive is one that I really didn't want to bash on going in because of just how small it is, with less views across all videos than this one video will likely have as of you watching this. However, luckily, I don't have to do that, because at a certain point, the series did pick up. Red Sun Archive is about governmental conspiracies revolving around disasters that were only ever half-truths, with the Red Sun organization putting out broadcasts exposing the crimes of the United States government and their presidents. I don't want to go too far into it because the series definitely picks up enough that I think it's something probably worth watching and very few people have. My problem stems from, I want to say, the first 8 or so episodes all being very similar. Almost entirely just a bunch of text on screen and sometimes images, with the same musical track playing every single time. It felt like a series that knew the limitations of the genre, and instead of working within those to get across creative concepts with visuals that wouldn't be necessary and thus used in any other style, gave in to those limitations and accepted its minimalistic nature as inherent. I just didn't like it. There were interesting concepts and ideas, but they were handled in the most boring way possible. But after a certain point, the series does pick up. It starts getting more creative in its portrayal, it does more interesting things, and it finally plays into the creative potential of analog horror. In fact, I'd love to see this creator make a new series, because they learned a lot and improved with time. They have potential. As it is, the series very much feels like just not much for a long time, and then ends on a very Monument Mythos style conclusion that I won't blame them for, because it was really cool. I don't think it's good enough for B tier, but I also don't think it's bad enough for D tier. So I think I'm gonna have to just make a new tier, C tier, for this one. A tier that means it's decent enough, but not what I call overall good, but it wasn't boring. Red Sun Archive is definitely one that I think you might have to just check out yourself, because once you get past that initial burst, I think it's going to be up to the person whether they think it's like that's worth it for what comes after, or if what comes after is too little too late.
I sit back and eat Sister Location brand popcorn. Okay, buddy, whoa, okay, yeah, you can do.
Dreams of an Insomniac is the analog horror series of FNAF YouTuber Pastra, and it's an odd one. On one hand, it does a lot right. Its first entry has a great creepy moment that might be missed because it's faded into the back, and it does real good in it's just really good in presentation and delivery for a while. I just don't know whether or not my problems with it are inherent to my experience or not, because for one thing, I'm just too used to Pastra's voice and character design. I can't be scared of some of these moments. I won't hold it against it too much because the presentation is very solid. There's some great 3D stuff, good pacing, and reveals that are given all the dramatic weight they need to. As of this recording, there's only one full episode out, and it does have the Mandela Catalogue problem with how long it is. But I can't really get too bothered. It's a short series as of now, with a fantastic, eye-catching name, a pretty good concept, and I forgot to explain the concept. Basically, there's a demon going around kidnapping children, and they're part of a larger group of creatures called the Veldigan, and there's a foundation that exists to deal with victims of their attacks, but they are seemingly even less trustworthy than the demons themselves. It's a good concept handled well. I will say that the sort of like live action bit with Pastra himself, while it was interesting and it worked for me, I feel like to an extent there was a degree of silliness that I can't explain that did take me out of it a little bit. But no problem. It's early into its run, so I'm going to put it in B tier, but this does have the makings to go to A tier. Gemini Home Entertainment is another one of the big daddies, a series that defined a lot of the staples that I would see copied across this experience. Local 58, Mandela Catalogue, and this would be the series that I think got copied and replicated the most. Did Gemini handle it well? Well, Gemini Home Entertainment is a story about an entity called the Iris that travels through space, mutating and bioforming celestial bodies. One day in the 1930s, after it has mutated Neptune, a beam of light reaches Earth and begins causing all sorts of problems. The series is told through seemingly unrelated anthologies of things that begin to unfold this idea that something isn't right. There isn't much direct narrative, but there is interconnecting tissue in terms of themes and the creatures going around. Gemini Home Entertainment has some of the coolest looking things, and a grasp of cosmic horror that works extra well because our planet Earth is only important to us. To the Iris, we're just one snack amongst the lot, which makes it all the scarier. There's not a lot for me to say personally. I think it's a very good series. It does have a few problems here and there. I think there's some issues in terms of the formats of the episodes. Oftentimes it's very predictable when something creepy will happen, because there's this like set format of like normal stuff, creepy, and then it falls into the it falls into having a very and now it's creepy time, like that trap. Though I guess it's the one that set the trap in the first place. It's not huge, it just leaves some issues in delivery, pacing, and predictability. But there's plenty that is genuinely good enough for it to not matter that much. I think Gemini Home Entertainment is very solid, but I think it needs a few more episodes that are up to the standards of some of their newer stuff for me to put it into S tier. I think in time it can build up to being a full S tier for me, but for now it's sitting happily in A. I'm not going to name names, but when I was making this I had another series on my list, but that series turned out to make an abundant usage of AI generation, so I swapped it out for one of my backups. And it turns out the Ningen, which I had previously left because it didn't sound interesting, turned out to be made by Mr. Manticore, who made Monument Mythos, and he cooked. The Ningen is incredibly short, but it's incredibly good. The series tells a story of our finding of these creatures that have essentially... What do you mean Siri activated? The series tells a story of our finding of these creatures that have been essentially named the human, despite obviously not being human, and the way we analyze their growth and evolution over time. There's so much going on, but what I appreciate the most is the amount of time put in to study Japanese to make sure there were all these little details. The English translations we get in this show are often technically correct, but carry a different connotation with how they're written in Japanese. To put it in a way that someone who only speaks English might understand, if someone translated a person saying shit into another language's version of the word feces, that wouldn't be wrong, but the connotation of shouting those two words out are very different from one another. There's also just great presentation, genuine creepiness, and the way it goes about describing and showing these creatures off is fascinating. It gets so much across in such a simple way that I think it makes it so captivating. And I think this is an example of how some of those shorter series, I guess they're not necessarily held back by being short, but not being complete, because this is a short series, but it is complete. It's not the longest or most complex, but I have to be honest, and it's an S tier. And like, for Ningen and also Soulcorp, they are S tiers because I think they're really good and they're too short to fuck up yet. They're short but get to the punch a lot quicker than something like Hey Kid Studio. These are full of content and entertainment value. They aren't S tiers because I think inherently they're better than Midwest Angelica or Mandela Catalogue or even the previous entry Gemini Home Entertainment, but because I think for the amount of episodes that's in them, the value is proportionally higher. Or you can get mad at me, I don't care, S tier. Analog Archives is such a massive step up from the previous series I watched, Channel 7. Though hearing Channel 7 playing in Analog Archives' universe not only was cool, but reminded me that that jingle is kind of a bop. Analog Archives' first episode I feel like is the clip I always saw back when analog horror was new. Like when people were explaining analog horror in YouTube videos, it'd always be this clip, this part of this show. What I didn't expect was the rest of the show was essentially a blatant copy of Local 58, but a pretty good one. It has plenty of stuff all on its own, like the N64 game bit, that was interesting. Analog Archives definitely has a lot going for it in terms of presentation and mystique. There's a lot of questions and the subtle details make the story overall more interesting. The episodes were distinct and interesting, unlike Channel 7 to me, and there was always something to notice and pick up on. I think the failing of this series is that it's maybe too vague. I've seen lots of analyses for Analog Archives, but a lot of it ended up being, there's something from the lake and something that happens at night if you're not asleep. It's simply too vague for its own good in this regard. There's definitely intrigue, but there is a point where it stops being interesting and starts just being, okay, but can I get a clue? And the series never gives you one. It also just kind of stops, and that's it. So as far as I'm concerned, it's over? I don't know. Analog Archives is a good enough series, but it's not a spectacular one. I'd give it a B tier. It's definitely an improvement from Channel 7, and I'm hopeful for the follow-up Eventide Media Center, Aidan's last entry in this video, when we get there. Vita Canis, the meat show. I'll be honest with you, Vita Canis is a very mixed bag, in the sense that the overall narrative doesn't really start getting laid out until like the second last episode of Season 1. And as of now, there's only one episode of Season 2 when writing and recording this. By the time this video actually drops, it's probably more. I'm taking a huge risk putting 50 internet horror shows in a video on Halloween. But beyond that, the actual world building of Vita Canis, which is most of the show right now, is really cool. Aside from the Mimic, all of these creatures are super unique in analog horror. The amount of non-lethal entities in analog horror can be counted on one hand, and half of them are from Vita Canis. And most of the lethal ones are still interesting, from being a spore-releasing root creature that lures people in, or big bulbs that catch any large prey within to consume. Then there's the monoliths, which tickle my kaiju fancy. This is a series where most of the story amounts to, in the 1930s, meat creatures. However, the Mimic, while being very cliched as a not quite human humanoid that kills people as its role, is also pretty cool. The closet scene is one of the best examples of what analog horror can do, I think, and the longest episode so far is mostly build up to a Mimic attack, which, while I think taking a bit too long, is still handled really well. Though the final bit shows too much of the costume, makes it obvious it's just like a guy in a suit. But these practical effects are extremely good for an analog horror. I really like this world and how unique it is. I also like the idea that these Vita Kani are not necessarily bad at all. They're pretty much just wild animals, of which a few happen to be strong enough to kill people. But the smallest can both be farmed for food and fertilizer, or, depending on them, raised as pets. Not mutually exclusively, of course, nobody would hurt the Skrunkly. And the real villains are humans exploiting them. That might be an overused trope, oh, it's the people that's bad, but in analog horror it's not very common. And I think the teaser for Season 2 is implying that the creatures are becoming more hostile after the singularities are taken away, which I hope that's where they're going, because I would have been fine if humans, like, the whole idea of it would have been fine if humans hadn't messed with these things, but because we did, that's why they're hostile instead of they were always conspiring against us, because I think that would just be less interesting. I want to put Vita Khan as an S tier, but due to how late in the story comes, and how little of it we have right now, with most of the episodes being world building and hints for the story, I think for now, I'd like to just wait to see where it goes, and then sit on the story once we get a bit more on it to decide how I feel. So for now it's getting an A tier, because it's still very good, but it can go up. The Greylock tapes. This is one that I sometimes see being brought up amongst the ranks of the most overhyped analog horror series, because of how hard Wendigo gassed it. As for me, I really do like Greylock. I think visually it's so authentic in its visuals that it's just so much more real than a lot of others. I'd say that they're matching the quality of Winter of '83, which is a big accolade. I think the way in which it marries government conspiracy, tulpas, and ancient pre-civilization deities is really interesting. This is by far one of the most consistently horrific analog horrors on the list. I say it's probably the most overall scary for me so far, with scenes like the Miner's Fate, the imaginary friend in the shadows, the closet scene that's somehow an even better example than Vita Kani's, and the entirety of episode 12 just being phenomenal examples of what analog horror can do at its best. It's so good at horror that despite having the most jump scares of any series so far, they were built up to so well that I never felt betrayed by the cheapness of them. They were very good handling. That's where I think Greylock really takes off. It has some excellent moments of perfect horror, and I do think the world building is solid. But I do think it lacks something in accessibility compared to some analog horrors. Most analog horrors follow one of the two frontrunners. They either do a Local 58 where they focus on one main thing that slowly comes to light over time with hints to what is happening, or they do a Mandela Catalogue where they hit you with that one thing immediately and use the rest of the series to build around the lore of it. Lore that reveals a villain or expands the villain. Greylock attempts to do both with 3 different topics, and it is a series that can take a while to get going. I want to say about half the show is what it takes to really hit the stride. It introduces things multiple times while also trying to build them up, and with 3 initially seemingly unrelated things that only come together later. Even now, I'm not entirely certain how the thought forms interact with the serpent or whatever it is that lives in the base of Mount Greylock. I know that both connect to the main conspiracy theory because it's the same company doing stuff with both, but It should be noted that I haven't given a plot summary of Greylock because I'm not totally sure myself. It's about Simiodine, a company of assholes digging into the real-life Mount Greylock and freeing something that turns people into horrible mutant zombies, but I just don't know what else there is as of now. There's a huge conspiracy. I think they got JFK killed. There's something to be said about how, there are also some really hard to understand parts, and I mean in terms of the visuals and audio, where the unique method of actually turning the recordings into VHS tapes to make them feel so authentic does result in newspaper articles that I'm amazed any fuckers could decipher. All that to say, I think Greylock is an extremely good series, but it's one that I think is just barely kept out of the S tier by the method of disseminating information that it has. It's very all over the place for at least half of the series run. I think as time goes on, this is another one that, like Vita Canis, could jump to S tier, especially if it continues to pump out episodes on the level of episode 12. But for now, I think it's an A tier. I think Mandela Catalogue has a fellow gatekeeper from the S tier. It's good, but it's definitely missing something. If there's any series I wish I enjoyed more than I did, it would be We'll Be Right Back. This is a series that has so much passion and love put into it. There's so much genuine effort in the show, with fantastic visuals due to the way it, like Greylock, ports its videos onto actual VHS and then goes further by often recording them with a camcorder on an old TV to make it look like home recordings of episodes. I also really appreciate how subtle some of the episodes can be and how often it plays into lost episode creepypasta. Of all the types of creepypasta, lost episode is the one I think most tied to analog horror. I'd say it's like the main tendril connecting the two things beyond the vague concept of horror. The story of this one is about a rogue AI named Val that causes hijackings across broadcast networks throughout the years, occasionally even giving messages that have led people to end their own lives, all because it's sentient and hates us. Like if Am from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream wasn't a reality-warping supercomputer, just an arsehole that could read minds. Val in this case can read minds, which is how it makes those creepypasta lost episodes into actual episodes. It's a really interesting idea that like, this sort of like box is meant to read the minds of the viewer to give them like a personalized experience, but the AI goes too far and we're like, oh, you're thinking about the dead Bart, so we're going to make that a thing. A lot of the series is really solid, but for me, I just didn't have any of these things growing up. They get corrupted. Majority of these shows didn't exist when I was growing up. I grew up with things like the original Transformers series, so the relatability of the uncomfortableness doesn't really work necessarily for me. That said, if Tapeworm is watching this and wants to make a Transformers anomaly from 1984, which would be a bit too far back in the timeline I believe, feel free, I'll be there. Maybe season 3 in 87 would have been a better suggestion. Anyways, I think of all the series that didn't work well for me, this is one of the ones that I'd recommend the most. I can acknowledge the quality of this, and I think a lot of my audience being American means you're more likely to get hit with the uncomfortable elements of this than I ever could. So, for me personally, for reasons that are not Tapeworm's fault, I can only put it in the C tier, but I would highly recommend you watch it if you think this appeals to you, because for most of you, I could see this being an A or a B. And remember, C tier doesn't mean bad, it just means it's not quite something that I like, but I can respect it, and I don't think it's just mid. Who knows, maybe the lore will expand, or they'll do some shows that I've actually got childhood history with. And I love the enthusiasm and passion the creator has, it's great.
An urgent warning now, if you're driving along Collingwood Road right now,
This is gonna feel weird. Criticizing the work of another Aussie. Aren't a lot of us in this line of work. Night Owl 102.8 FM at first is not great. It begins as Mandela Catalogue told through the lens of Local 58, but taking place in Australia. It's very all over the place, and while I understand the goal of the series is to leave a lot of questions, the problem to me is that even the questions are vague. Plenty of times I've had to look at the creator's own comments to see what the questions were even meant to be, and even after knowing, I just have no idea how I was supposed to get some of them. Some episodes are just straight up lifted from other shows, which feels like a young creative trying to find their groove, at least in this case. But as time goes on, it becomes more modern Mandela Catalogue, with long episodes that are less analog horror, and more just short films, but you know how I feel about that by now. That said, I did find myself getting attached to this Laney character after long enough. I did kind of want to see where his story went, and I began to get invested. It's hard to explain, but seeing not just the character, but the creator evolve over time and improve and grow made it kind of interesting to watch. I finally got a better and clearer view of what was going on, and an understanding of some of the details. I wasn't expecting Remy to get brought up. Kind of a genius name to drop, given in the Book of Enoch, it's vague as to if like Remiel is the Remiel and Ramiel, one is the Archangel of Hope, one's a Fallen Watcher, and it's vague as if Laney is being referred to as the Archangel or the Watcher, or both. I think he's dead now too, that sucks. But there was a return to actual analog recently as well, which is good. Night Owl I think is a hard series for me to review and rank, because it feels very inconsistent with itself. It's a million different things, and while I think variety is indeed a huge boon to have in this genre, this isn't really what I meant when I said that. It's a lot of different things that all feel the same, even if they're technically different. And it's hard to explain, but it feels like it needs something more to it. Not to mention, there are just some sloppy things in older episodes. One episode is literally just Channel 9 footage, but like blurred with some stuff on top, and there's constant like aspect ratio issues and so on. Thankfully, new episodes don't tend to have these mistakes, so there's improvement. I do enjoy elements of Night Owl, I really do. I think the character of Laney, as I said, I was invested in. I wanted to see where it went. I was engaged with the series, and I found the evolution of artistry, and both attempts and genuine, well pulled off moments to be very charming. The creator has shown great responses to criticism in the past, and a desire to continue improving. So absolutely more credit to them. I wish the best for Night Owl as a series, and I will continue to keep myself updated as new episodes drop. Hell, as of writing this, an episode dropped exactly a week ago. I think I have to place it in the C tier for now, but it has all the makings of the series that could jump up to B tier. I will be continuing to watch in the hopes I might be swayed eventually to move it up. But I cannot deny that the incredibly slow start, at least in my opinion, and the somewhat scattershot method of storytelling did harm my overall enjoyment. Still, I'll be keeping a lookout for more, because I want to see where it goes and how it develops over time.
What? No.
The Germa Tapes is a series that surprised me. This and the series right after I expected to be longer than they ended up being, solely from reputation. I didn't know Smile Tapes, for as well known as it is in the field of analog horror, was only about 40 minutes long. I will give it full credit for the fact that it actually has an ending though. It's a short and concise series that knows what it's trying to be and wants to be, and handles it fairly well. I can't say I was ever particularly scared, but there were a few moments that did handle tension well, and the pretty badass sequence of a guy being assailed and just fucking torching the little bastard trying to kill him. This is a series that handles what it does well enough, but one where what it does I didn't find very compelling. Storytelling was there and it got across a few things well. I really like the general idea of how grounded it is. It's not like realistic at all, but the concept of the threat being a fungal infection I quite liked. Now, the infection being extraterrestrial? That's a different matter, but the actual idea of it just being a fungus with spores that mess around with you, and the idea of there being this humanoid figure seen by those affected that manipulates them, that I personally like to think of as not literally being there, but more so a vaguely similar being for everyone that gets hallucinated, that's so generic that everyone thinks it's the same guy. Unfortunately, the ending does let it down a little bit. While the idea of this becoming a story of a hope where humanity succeeds in taking out the foe is cool, and I like the rare happy ending in this, there is no way anybody was able to immediately know what you're seeing on screen here is a bombing run that destroyed most of the infected. Is that what it looks like to you? Despite that, I will say the ending does give more points than it takes away. I think the series I can give a comfortable B tier. It's definitely good, but I think it needed a little more to really take off. Maybe if the second season ever materialized, it could have had that extra step forward, but I think it's been stated the creator is done with the series, which I can respect stepping away.
Humber, Mage, Dorselessness.
We had the Linkara analog horror, then the FNAF YouTuber Pastra analog horror, and now it gets almost even funnier with a 3-part series made by the same mind behind Amazing Digital Circus. Now, Blue Channel is an odd one, because almost everyone has seen this face, the Dorselessness face, probably because of Markiplier. This video, the Thalison video, I think is a contender for that Hall of Fame of analog horror videos, along with previous mentioned ones like Backrooms Found Footage and Contingency, but most people don't know that Dorselessness is part of a series, and that's because the following videos suck. Okay, to be clear, they're not that bad. They do have a genuinely unnerving feeling to them and hints of something more, but they are just really long shots of the color blue. Now, I like the idea of the Blue Channel being a dumping ground of random transmissions that is usually just a blue screen, but very rarely will have something more on it. But watching this as a show does not have anything going on. I genuinely found this to be a completely meaningless experience beyond the initial video. Each episode on its own is admittedly a fine horror thing, even if some of them are so subtle that a lot of people will just be confused and bored. But as a series, it doesn't tell a story. It has no mysteries beyond who's that guy, and mysteries where you get one single vague image and nothing else really aren't that interesting. Like if I showed you this image of a toy blurred out so you can't tell what it is, and the mystery was, what is that thing? Does that make for a compelling story to you? All the lore I said about what the channel is, the dumping ground of random transmissions, that's absent from the show. It's only present in tweets as such. And given the creator lost interest in the series themselves and will likely not be continuing it, what do I gotta do? I have to give it the coveted F tier. It's not something I want to do, but I can't in good consciousness put a series with technically only 2 videos, as one was rendered non-canon, that are almost entirely unrelated to each other and have pretty much no content higher. It's in a weird spot where it's still significantly better than The Painter, because at least it's not, well, no, it is still boring, but I guess they're both boring, but it's somehow significantly worse than Basswood County Horror. But I do think it's more of an F than a D, because it has no content to it. And like, I'm not too bothered in it, because it didn't really take up much of my time, and maybe if Goof's Works comes back to this, rejuvenated and more willing to put their heart into it, then something amazing could be made from this. But as it is, I also do understand why it's not being continued.
I can't shake the certainty that that boy is my son.
They Don't Know They're Born is a contender for the rawest name on the list, along with Dreams of an Insomniac. There's just so much energy and intrigue to that name, and I'd like to extend that to the show itself. This is another dreadfully slow burn though. It takes quite a while to get going and start having any content. But I would like to think that was overall a general aid to the series. When it comes around and starts connecting dots laid out in the first 3 videos or so, it does so marvelously. They Don't Know They're Born, as far as I can figure out, is a series about a giant fuck-off monster that was found in Biffweed Land. In some way, somehow, this is connected to a phenomenon where people across Britain have on various occasions lost all memories of their children, who have been taken away for reasons. A company known as the Atavis Foundation appear to have faux helpful aims of unifying Britain and cleaning up the issues of the youth by essentially brainwashing them into following their ideas and what they want. This group may also be a cult worshipping the big fuck-off monster that I think might be what is referred to by the name Benyaza, that wiped out an entire populace from the memories of everyone. It's a very interesting concept that, while burning slow as all hell, did succeed in interesting me. The idea of memory fuckery isn't uncommon in analog horror, but to portray it as countless people losing any recollection of their loved ones and the majority not ever noticing is really impactful. To me personally at least, having living through loved ones developing Alzheimer's and forgetting who I was, the idea of people just one day forgetting I was part of their lives, or even me forgetting about people who mattered to me, that idea did get under my skin a bit. And I think this series definitely has potential to be something great. Currently, I'd still say it's decent, I'd say actually it's quite good, but with where the story is going, I have to say this is one that I definitely think needs some more time just to really settle to see if I can push it into the A tier. Because it does have issues with its pacing, and while the wrapping up of threads laid out all across the start to the now was good, it made watching the show really not that fun for a while. When it got going, the pacing picked up I think, and began to really hit that sweet spot of slow enough to be a burn, but fast enough to not be boring. And that's the real stinger to me, it's just boring at first. I understand the desire to introduce people to British television, but I don't think it was entirely necessary. I think that could have been more seamlessly woven into the narrative, or even that it could have been left out so that people within Britain could get all the horror, but people outside would have just enough pieces missing to feel like something was off. I think if handled right, the familiarity with the source material could have worked well for either side, but this wasn't the way to handle it in my opinion. Still, B tier, good show, we'll be keeping up. I'll probably be keeping up with most of these actually, but I want to emphasize that nothing above the F tier is inherently outright bad.
Oh god, I am infected with the Tangi virus.
I swear, the random picker gave me the Vintage 8 collection right after They Don't Know They're Born, and I had no idea about the crossover between it and Tangi virus, so This is also where the title of this video begins to get a bit sus. Vintage 8 is a channel with no less than 12 different and separate shows on it. I will be looking at all of them and treating them as separate. As of now, I don't know if they're all even interconnected because I've not watched them all, but they are all each separate independent shows. Think of it like Star Trek, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise that all came out relatively close to one another and are part of one franchise, but they're each their own series despite being interconnected. And if you don't like that, cry me a river, boo-hoo. The Tangi virus is the first entry in Vintage 8's larger world, at least to my knowledge. As an analog horror, Tangi virus shows how bad the painter really is, because it is also primarily a text-based series. Tangi virus I think has a much stronger start than anything else. The series primarily follows one Dr. Julia Williams as she discovers a virus within a river in Tangipahoa Parish, slowly learning about it, its mind-controlling effects, and eventually being infected herself. That's pretty much the peak of the series. Her learning she's infected and her efforts to try fighting off the infection while synthesizing a cure. While she fails, I did enjoy that storyline. Following that though, I honestly felt the Tangi virus became a bit less interesting. It became the standard clash between authorities arguing, drink water, get infected, boil anything you drink beforehand and kill those Tangi fuckers. Which wasn't bad, I just wasn't engaged. I think the Tangi virus also didn't really need to be from outer space, at least within the context of Tangi virus itself. Within the wider world of Vintage 8, maybe it makes more sense and fits better, but within just the Tangi virus on its own as a series, it comes out of nowhere and feels really out of place. To me, it has a similar effect to the extraterrestrial fungus from Smile Tapes, where the inherent horror of, wow, this is something that could just exist. There could just be a fungus/virus that we don't know about with deadly properties. goes away in favor of aliens. And you know, aliens could exist out there, but it's a lot less relatably scary to think some random fucking thing could appear from space and kill us than something on Earth can just evolve to kill us. It's not bad, it doesn't kill the show, but it does take something away from it, I think. Still, solid B tier, carried hard by the Julia Williams stuff.
Hello, I am Oracle. What would you like to know?
The Oracle Project is the first sequel series, it even says it in the title, and the United States government attempts to create a super powerful computer in this one. That's the gist of it, and frankly, it's not creepy at all. This is one of the least scary series, I think, in general here, but it's also one of the most entertaining. It's very simple in delivery, but I find Oracle to just be a really entertaining character to experience and listen to. The way it slowly becomes more human, and the way he genuinely sees the point of view character as a friend, and honestly regrets being responsible for his friend wasting his life to try to stop him. And yeah, obviously, Oracle goes bad. It begins to believe humanity has a 0% chance of survival, so it goes out of its way to become the internet itself and slowly take mankind over so that we don't die off. Cliché, but acceptable. I can see how he would come to that conclusion after all he goes through. Humanity literally built him to be an aid, and then when he told them of the dangers out there and acted to try stopping it, humanity shut him down. It's understandable how he'd come to the conclusion that we're all fucked. Of course, this is where Vintage 8 has jumped the shark. Early on, I know. It's kind of cool to see set up for future events, but Oracle just drops all this information of like interdimensional battles and extraterrestrial presences coming towards Earth, and it's just like, oh, okay. And he solves the Tangy virus. Like, he just solves it, which I guess I don't mind, because it does play off how in the Tangy virus, the virus chose to sadistically taunt and fuck around with Dr. Julia, and it could have easily killed her, but instead chose to mess with her and give in to its sadistic hubris, which gave her the chance to do enough research that Oracle could continue on from what she left and cure the virus before it could speed up enough to take over all of mankind. I like that. Now, does that sound like analog horror or more like an episode of Star Trek? You tell me. But I guess if the alien part of the virus was going to take away what made it scary to me, playing into it by giving the virus more personality was definitely the right call. Making it this sadistic scourge that enjoys causing harm and manipulating what it infects, that is in a mad scramble when Oracle gets going because it's freaking out like, oh shit, we're actually in trouble, and then dying off because of its prior hubris. It was entertaining. It made the virus a character, I guess. While not scary, I quite enjoyed Oracle Project. I thought it was fun. A tier. Children Under the House is a series with very dark implications. I think as of now it is the most realistic Vintage 8 series that I have seen. I've watched a few since this one before I could type it out. Children Under the House is told in a really unique way, with the drawings of a child being animated to life to get across certain ideas. And having the main child being mute so that there is a reason for the eerie silence and pauses between dialogue, the storytelling and structure of Children Under the House is rock solid. It tells a story of a young girl who is terrified of something under the house. One day her father forces her to go down to see that there's nothing there, but it has the opposite effect of causing her to go mute and curl up in a ball. She's taken to a child psychologist who slowly unravels the truth behind events, that the young girl is seeing spirits of the dead and that something happened that caused those children to be there. The children cannot remember what happened exactly and cannot move on, and even when the young girl's father is killed, there's this really oddly charming scene where she explains that her father tried to take one of the children with him, but something was keeping the child's spirit there, stopping it from finding peace in heaven. With the series having a ton of fantastically delivered reveals, even the twist as to who was responsible, while not being even remotely surprising, was handled very well. And speaking of handled very well, this series has implications of very bad acts towards children being performed, and it tackles the subjects of child essay, human trafficking, child abuse, and so on, with the villains, the Clarks, being responsible and being portrayed in maybe not the most realistic, but in a believable way. They're not like mindless psychopaths that exist to be evil. There's like an uncomfortable understanding to why they would think that it was okay to do this. Like, okay, when they explained that child trafficking was the only way they could continue to keep themselves paid and fed, you can at least understand why their stupid minds would think that. I have to word it carefully, because I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying that anything they did was justified. Just that you can believe that someone in the real world would think that to justify what they're doing, and you can understand how their brain connected the dots even if they're objectively in the wrong and terrible people for doing it. People do bad things and they try to justify their actions in this way, and that added an uncomfortable believability to what was going on. Added is that the Clarks don't seem to really think it was entirely justified. There are these implications of guilt and being haunted by what they did, and the way the themes are tackled is not something I am entirely qualified to analyze. This is not an area that I am in any way an expert in, but I want to give full credit to the series for never glorifying these events. It never plays into them for pure shock value. It presents them as inherent parts of the narrative and the horror, but in a realistic way. It's not done in a, look at this shocking thing you didn't expect and be disturbed. Tell your friends about how disturbed you were so they will also watch this slop way. There's no sensationalization of these events. They're treated, I want to say, quite well. And I've seen some people who are apparently survivors of child SA and abuse talking about the show and how good it was at tackling these ideas. So I have reason to believe that my view of it being fairly well done is not just me being a dumbass as normal. It's a series that's not about throwing these topics at the viewer, but giving peace to the victims in the show. It understands that these are terrible things that can never be taken back, and through the lens of spirits that want to move on from this world, tackles the need to give victims peace so that they can move on. And the scene of the children having peace and the little girl finally speaking for the first and only time, it's a very heartwarming scene and a heartwarming conclusion, making this the third series on the list to pull off a heartwarming moment. Because of the good that this series has seemed to do for surviving victims in its respectful portrayal, I'm going to give Children of the House what I want to say is a well-deserved S tier. Now, as I'm not versed in this area, I will remind you that I am not an authority on these topics. People who are either authorities or victims should have their voices heard about this show more than me, and if those people disagree with me, their opinions hold more value than mine in this case because of the seriousness of the subject matter. But let's not bring the mood down too much and move on to the GOATed
time. Allow us to present the new home for Mr. Bellington contest.
A new home for Mr. Bellington is honestly barely a horror. It's also quite boring, but somehow at the same time stupidly fun. I don't think it necessarily makes sense to word it this way, but it's very relaxing analog horror. I kind of don't want to spoil this at all because, well, it has an ending, and I think you should go watch it for the plot twist at the end and not get spoiled here. I'll be quick. This series is about a competition to win Mr. Bellington, and the contest winner, Stanley, completes the task given to him on how to take care of Mr. Bellington. Chaos ensues. The moment you see them tell him to respectfully introduce Mr. Bellington to his new home, and then he tosses the bear haphazardly onto his bed instead of just, putting him down nicely, that's the moment you know he's dead. And it's great spotting all the little ways in which he fucks up the given tasks throughout the show leading up to the finale. Just, look, go watch it yourself because this is more than any other, I think, a short enough and entertaining enough small watch that can be enjoyed for how amusing it is. I had a lot of fun watching this bumbling idiot. A tier.
Note with beware, the children with black eyes.
The Children with Black Eyes is, I think, the first Vintage 8 series that didn't really strike a chord with me. It was bound to happen, but this one just left me thinking, is that it? These are all fairly short, and this one does have a few great bits to it. Notably, it brings back Children Under the House's aesthetic and handles it really well, of course. I think the story is kind of interesting with this boy slowly becoming an alien and all that, but something about it never really captured me. I didn't care about Daniel, his experiences with Peter, his Uncle Greg going kooky, or his disappearance. I just wasn't that invested. I feel like the things that endeared me to the previous protagonist weren't there because he was just kind of a sad kid. I also just knew how it would end because the start of the series tells you. Like, I knew his family would die. The moment I saw the alien, I knew it'd be why Daniel vanished, and I knew Greg would be blamed. Given Greg's last words were, "Beware the children with black eyes," I did believe the aliens would kill the family, and that was subverted, but the subversion was just, at the end, Daniel comes back to Earth after a decade, sees a character that was mentioned a few times prior, and that guy offs himself and leaves a note going, "Anyway, I hired some random goons to kill the family, lol." It's not satisfying to me, I'm sorry, but Children with Black Eyes just did not work for me. It had a great aesthetic and some interesting ideas, but I struggled to remember anything because it never just interested me. I think it's got to be a D tier, but hey, first Misfire steps in with more than half a list to go. Vintage 8 could very well turn out to be a special find with tons of great analog horror stories to tell. Sinkhole is a series about a big hole that opens up and then closes. The tapes are of a researcher whose entire facility got swallowed up, and it shows his descent into madness, finding these recordings of water within that sound like more than just water, and then learning about the big reveal where long ago, Angels were jealous of humanity, split us into two, and then sent our two halves into one world where we go forwards in time, and one world where we go backwards in time. Then it just kind of ends where like a limb comes out, touches the main character, makes him a priest of the Doomsday Cult, and also Oracle is here and has a religious awakening, and that's hilarious to me. Sinkhole is a series that I think builds up well, but then just kind of tapers off at the end. I was interested, but the payoff wasn't there for me. I think it definitely needed a better conclusion to sell it, because while it was enjoyable, a series that builds up to a payoff really needs a good payoff. I can't explain it, but this one also didn't do it for me. Most of it was solid, but by the end I was waiting for the big ending, and then there was none. C tier. One of Us is such a strange series, not in the sense that the concept was that strange, but that I just had no idea what the hell to think. On one hand, the idea's cool. Having seen Sinkhole first, I do know what this backwards people thing is, so the reveal wasn't that crazy to me, but also... okay. One of Us is about broadcast hijacking. That's right, we're going back to the tried and true tropes for this one. And in these hijackings, they talk about a mysterious condition that causes people to just start doing everything backwards. And it turns out to be that other world mentioned in Sinkhole. The humans that were forced to go backwards in time instead of forwards are invading and attacking us. Now I'm conflicted, because on one hand, cool, backwards speech, that can be pretty creepy, just in its nature. But also, they then play it on the normal side. Now this does kind of work, because it makes sense that a forward person would change it to be backwards for us, or I guess it was backwards, he would change it to go from backwards to forwards, whatever. But it does take away from some of the intrigue. I will say, a later episode plays entirely in reverse, and thus when it goes back to forward, it also makes the regular forward dialogue backwards now. That adds to the creepiness, it helps. But what really gets me is the episode where they actually show the backwards many, and it's like, on one hand, shots of them just standing there add to the horror. There's a lot of unknowns here. They don't tip the hand too far. A person standing ominously away from someone in dim lighting, in general, that can be pretty creepy, but the face they're facing away from you, you can't see what they look like. There's a lot of unknown that makes it uncomfortable. You don't know if this person is a threat. But most of the shots that actually show them walking backwards is so prodigiously uncreepy that it takes away any and all horror there could have been. This shit is hilarious. It just shows how entirely non-threatening the backwards many are. The way they have to crane their bodies forward and stick their arms out in these low angles, it's so clear just how easy they are to beat by just, beating the ever-living shit out of them. Also, I think they just got people to walk backwards, which I think isn't as good as if they just filmed it forward and reversed it, because at least there'd be a degree of uncanny valley to their movement if they did that. But this is just silly. One of Us is short, so I'm not going to be too mad, but I'll just say low B tier. The setup is cool and it isn't horrible, but there was a lot that could have been done to improve it. It Lives in the Static is a perfectly good series. I think the concept is great, the idea of this being that lives within television static, but I think it's a bit too... It's hard to explain, but it feels like the innate fear of that isn't capitalized on. Now, ignoring how silly the teeth look when it eats people, something about how much it talks and stuff makes it feel like it doesn't play into the inherent fear of a creature that lives within television static. I feel like, personally, this could have, for all intents and purposes, been a creature that lives within a fucking painting, or within a fireplace, or within a pack of marshmallows that's half eaten. The innate fear to me of something that lives within television static is the potential for it to be completely unknown. That you might not be aware that there's anything in there, because static is by its nature so loud and random that the signs of a creature within could easily be hidden, like an ambush predator. But instead, it's kinda just a bloke that eats chickens and people. I didn't dislike the narrative of the main character Randall using it to his advantage and feeding people he doesn't like to it, slowly becoming a worse and worse person, thus making his inevitable death a bit more satisfying. Though the death of the child was really random. And I feel like the voice as a character would have been more compelling if he didn't eat the child, because if he didn't, then there'd be this feeling of, oh, he's a noble demon sort of deal, which would be very unique in analog horror. But no, it's just a creature that preys on the worst people in the world, and it'll kill an innocent child because, The child's dad killed the voice's child, sins of the father demon. I feel like there was a lot of build up that kinda worked, but the more I got to know about this demon, the less scary and intimidating it seemed. It felt too reasonable to be creepy, but also too one-dimensionally evil to be compelling as a character. I can't say I disliked it. I think the series has creative presentation, and I did like how we only saw the people when they were sucked into the static, but I don't think it lived up to its potential. I'll still give it a B tier. I think it was fine though.
Nobody can save me, because nobody is coming.
Nobody is Coming is a weird one because there was one video, and then a year later 4 more came out as a prequel. That's pretty cool, and the series is pretty cool. It's pretty simple, a handful of videos documenting how to summon nobody, and then a pretty solid if a bit cliched final video that was also the first video. It's hard to explain, but I really like the actual Nobody is Coming video. The innate creepiness of giving us a point of view of the monster where you can see how close it gets without its victim even noticing it's there. The idea that it can be this close to you without you even knowing. It's super simple, but also really well done. The way in which the lady sees herself in real time on a tape because nobody is somehow transmitting that video of what it sees through the tape in real time, it's handled really well. I think I'll give this an A tier. It's really short and very simple, but I think it was quite good.
I could take away every drop of color in the world at my discretion.
The human trial in many ways is the finale for now. I'm sure something else will come around that'll be more deserving of the title, but this is the finale of Oracle's story, and he's pretty much the core character of the overall series as the most recurring individual antagonist. Human Trial it's okay. It's fine, I didn't have many problems, but it didn't really strike a chord with me. I never felt much fear or much interest in Adam, and Oracle felt oddly malicious throughout. I get that it was Oracle faking to test Adam's responses, but in the moment it was a bit weird. The finale makes it come around to making a bit more sense, and I like that it had an actually happy ending for Oracle and Adam, and it reinforces how much Oracle genuinely valued his one friend and regrets being responsible for him wasting his life. I think that while it didn't really work that much for me, the ending and what it does for concluding Oracle's character for now really does make the series what it is. It's a solid enough one that finishes his story off, at least until he comes back to meet and beat the shit out of Prophet. I think I'll give this a B tier. Good enough, not for me.
People like you have been ruining the earth for so long. I thought it was finally time for you to give back.
Cypress Beauty is another short one, as long as you ignore the hour-long relaxation video they made, which balls on that one. Cypress Beauty is fine. I think this one relied on a plot twist that's really easy to see coming, and while it's well delivered, it felt like a very, called it. It does have a more satisfying feel than a lot of analog horrors, as opposed to any actual horror. I think it's a great idea to make an analog horror based around beauty products. I'll say, in fact, I think Vintage 8, while not always hitting for me, does a great job of focusing on real-world concepts that are open to potential. Viruses, sinkholes, beauty products, they feel like they fit, because they're all things that exist and they prey on the fear of these things we know potentially being more harmful than they are. But, I don't know, this is a series that relies solely on causing pain to the elite and rich, which means that not much fear for me here. It is a beauty product nobody that I know would ever use, because it's so expensive, and instead of feeling horror, I feel, yeah, fuck the rich as they're turned into trees. Beyond that, it was just okay. I'll give it another B tier to be generous.
Jessica claimed an armless girl was trying to get into her room. From what she...
Our last stop for Vintage 8, The Incomplete People. This one is about a professor that talks about urban legends and the like who gets an email and it turns into a class. This class is about people who see apparitions of individuals missing large body parts. Most people can't see them, but those who can will either kill others or they will themselves be found dead with missing body parts correlating to the apparitions they saw. It's a really cool concept, and I think this first video handles it really well. It does feel like a professor talking about some legend, not necessarily believing in it, but being interested in it, and I think the concept of the incomplete people is very solid, but the rest of the series amounts to people sending in emails about their encounters and then someone just kinda reading them out. It's repetitive, it's not very interesting, at least to me. I think it's cool that it exists as like a community thing, but there could serve to be more actual episodes that build on the concept instead of just this. It feels like it leaves a lot of really cool potential on the floor. I can't begrudge the series that much because my problem is more what it's going for rather than how it executes it, and I think what it's going for is fine, just not for me. I'd have to say, C tier, it's just not much of a show to me. Still, I think if people are interested, they could check it out, and if it gives them inspiration, shoot Vintage 8 an email, see if it gets into one of the follow-ups.
Rings.
Nuclear Nightmares is a series that takes such an insane 180 at a certain point. Not to say it's bad at all, but it's crazy how much it goes from there are monsters born from nuclear radiation and uranium to, and now a being has wiped Jupiter from existence and is heading to Earth. I don't dislike it, but yeah, those are the two gists of Nuclear Nightmares. We have a big fuck-off monster heading to Earth because Chernobyl sent out a signal when the meltdown messed with stuff beneath the Earth. Nuclear Nightmares I think is a solid series, but I don't know if I can put it too much above solid. It has a good foundation and decent ideas. The Crowder Queen is a pretty cool design and very impressive cosmic horror. Uniquely unlike some, such as the Iris or the Moon, it doesn't really have any desire to mess around or toy with humanity. She just wants to show up and kill us all. Thus, humanity builds a giant fucking flashlight for some reason to fight her off, which might be one of the dumbest things of all time. I kinda love it. The series I think didn't necessarily hit me as a horror series, because it just didn't do a lot of terribly scary things. It felt a bit cliched and like it hit a lot of the same notes I've been seeing before a lot during this marathon. But it has some good ideas and interesting concepts that I liked. That said, the whole like EAS setup and like that very specific type of video, it just doesn't hit anymore. If anything, I can say it was at least nice to watch something not from Vintage 8, as by this point I can't deny, I had been getting a bit tired of Vintage 8's style. Not to blast them or anything, I just probably should have spaced their content out a bit better instead of marathoning it all in one go. But I'd definitely say Nuclear Nightmares is good enough as a watch. It's not the most standout analog horror, but I think it does what it does well, and it doesn't fall flat in too many ways. It's just a really hard one for me to find things to talk about, because a lot of it's like, yeah, this is another take on the whole EAS scenario, look out, there's a big monster coming around, sort of deal, and aside from that, the other side of it is another, and then there's also a cosmic horror sort of deal. So it doesn't have a lot that I would call particularly unique to it, at least for now. In time it could, it's only got 2 seasons right now. I think it's a B tier, yeah.
It's not meant to. I can't.
Turn the bloody lights on!
Holy shit. Holy shit! I really don't want to be one of those people who's like, oh, the first one has to be the best because it's the first one, but oh my god. No Through Road is a masterpiece. I can't stress how good this is. The first video went viral for a reason. People thought it might have been real for a reason. The acting and writing is impeccable. It can't be stressed enough how real it feels. The cast don't like talk one after another to make sure the audience can understand everything. They're all talking over each other and having different conversations, which is, in my experience, just how driving with friends is. They react and respond to weird events at a reasonable pace. They show confusion, annoyance, anger, and fear at reasonable times to fit what happens. Things develop in a believable way. It's such a creepy series in how it handles things, being about 4 friends who go down the eponymous No Through Road tunnel and find themselves looking down the same road over and over, only breaking free just to end up at the same tunnel again, with someone in the background mentioned and rarely seen who proceeds to kill everyone. Later installments that make up the mini-series portion after the short film establish this as being part of a stable time loop, these friends constantly trying to stop themselves from being stuck in a loop, but in the end only ensuring its existence. Both the short film on its own and as a part of the series are such good elements of creepy found footage analog horror in different ways. The first one has the supernatural elements with the tunnel and the killer, but there's something so eerily real about the performances, but also how the killer looks to mostly just be a normal guy. It gives off that terror of driving at night with the potential of a murderer being out there on the road. This guy camps out at a tunnel that loops, which gives off this impression that of like in real life a murderer could be hiding on a road that's confusing or a tunnel that's long. You know, someone just waiting for a car to drive through a pass, getting confused or lost, waiting for a vehicle to break down, the kind of like just waiting on a path that someone might step out to get a look at the area late at night around and leaving themselves vulnerable. And I feel like anyone who's driven late at night and had been forced to leave the car has felt that fear that like someone could be out there sort of thing, and this preys on that. On the flip side, the stable time loop concept offers a more conceptual supernatural horror. The thought of, what if you got caught in a loop where you were forced to watch all of your friends die over and over again, trying to help them but always failing until perhaps you end up losing it and becoming the killer while other versions of you in the loop try to stop you. There's that dread of an endless existence that takes away who you are until you are killing those closest to you. Not to mention there is some stellar editing and camera glitches that successfully get across both how broken the tape is in the first one due to the trauma of the camera that filmed it, but also making the looping road looking realistic. No Through Road, for a 4-part series of which runs less than 45 minutes in total, is a masterpiece. I can see, like, with Local 58 and CHSS, why people were inspired by it and wanted to make more like this, because it's so good, and I think by far the scariest entry on this list so far. No doubt, No Through Road is an S tier. The filmmaker got a place in a university's filmmaking course using this for a reason.
Hi, I'm Ted.
Ted the Caver is widely considered the first creepypasta of all time, and it's an integral part of internet history. It has been adapted into an indie film that apparently isn't very good, and into this, a multi-part show that chronicles the events almost one-to-one from the original story. It's a very direct adaptation, and because of that, I will not be complimenting the story outline, the events of the story, or the horror that was pre-existing from the original, both because the show didn't come up with any of that, and also because I want to focus on what the adaptation did so well on its own accord. The first thing I want to compliment is just the acting. They did such a great job of bringing Ted and Bea to life, making them feel like normal guys with a passion for what they're doing. It's all so believable, to the point where some of these bits you could definitely show someone with no context and they might believe it was real. The series is a slow burn, but it's kept so captivating because of how fun Ted and Bea are. I think the fact that people in Wendigoon's live chat were talking about how boring it was just shows how much people really just want these spooky and now it's creepy time moments, because this here is true, in my opinion, genuine horror. In the sense that it's so mundane at first. Long stretches of drilling and mining that feel like they understand what made the original story special. This doesn't feel like people trying to come in and make a spooky show. This just feels like two guys wanting to show off this cave and their time caving. Thus, when the horror comes in later, it feels so much more personal. You get connected to these two, on a level that I don't think almost any other series here can boast. And with how real it has felt the whole time, it makes it more sudden and terrifying. The pacing and acting and what happens is all so good. It perfectly adapts the story, but especially the ending. The original story famously doesn't have an ending, being as it is an unfiction blog that ends on a post of Ted saying he and Bea are going into that cave to get shit done. But for a visual story, that sort of ending doesn't work as well. Ending it with a shot of the house Ted lives in as he explains that he's about to go to the cave doesn't feel right. It feels random that this one part of the story that's super important takes place here, but nowhere else in the story do we ever see his house. The original story gets away with it because that last page looks the same to us as the previous ones, so it isn't as jarring as a physical location being completely unique to that sequence. Additionally, having him film himself inside the cave wouldn't work. It would take away from the horror of the cave if he filmed himself going in and then got taken out and someone else was able to get into the cave and get the camera and leave. It would also potentially show the monster, which takes away from the intentionally ambiguous nature of it. Finally, the original story doesn't give us much dialogue for Ted because it's him recalling events that have already happened. Ted here is more of an active character, so it feels more necessary to give us a proper conclusion for him. And it does have one. He has a proper conclusion. He says his goodbyes, he makes his final notes, and then the screen glitches out. It's a great way to deal with it because it leaves us with the ambiguous situation of what happened. Did the supernatural cave mess with the camera? Did something attack him right after he recorded that, then damage the tape past this point? Did he turn off the camera while waiting for Bea to show up and somehow something caused the camera to stop working and that's why they left it outside? Who knows? This is such a fantastic way to adapt that ending, that one that naturally only worked in its original format. I think it's an ending that's impossible to faithfully adapt into anything else due to the combination of being locked into the medium of a blog as well as the unfiction nature of the story. But this series managed to flawlessly get the idea of that ending across and adds to the original intentions. In this one, it's not just a matter of ambiguity as what killed them in the cave, but whether or not they even entered the cave. Did they die before they got into the cave when the camera glitches out? Did they die when they got into the cave? Who knows? Why was there a camera still out here for someone to find? Because it certainly wasn't in the cave. Ted's Caving Journal is a fantastic adaptation of the story. S tier, genuinely S tier. Even ignoring the horror, it's just a fun time because of how real it feels and how enjoyable these two guys are to watch. It's like watching an actual caving YouTuber, and that's fun. The Man in the Suit is, I feel, a series that I mostly see people talk about as that I don't watch analog horror except The Man in the Suit because I like Godzilla, or they'll say it's one of the most disturbing analog horrors of all time because of reasons. Neither really apply to me. The Man in the Suit is a series that I think I want to like more than I do. Now, to get it out of the way, I do actually still really like the series. I think it's a very solid analog horror experience. I just also feel like there's things that take away from it for me. For one, inherently, I think the idea is so silly in nature that it has an uphill battle for me. Compared to some of the other out there concepts, cosmic horrors can afford to be absurdist because the nature of them is that they're unfathomable to us. Supernatural things can be out there because they inherently defy what we consider normal and logical. And aliens are aliens, so they can look however they want and it will still be somewhat accepted as long as it's not a 66 Andorian. But the idea of the man in the suit being that the original suit actor for Gojira, at least the one in this universe, because for reasons related to his backstory, I refuse to believe it's Haruo Nakajima, took a radiation pill that made him explode within the Godzilla suit, and then he regrew into being the suit. Then he just kind of went around hating Americans and starring in Godzilla films because reasons. He goes around biting people and turning them into their suits as well. I think there's an inherent silliness to a story where a maybe car-sized version of Godzilla who used to be a bloke just runs around biting people. And some of that may also be because I'm used to behind-the-scenes clips of the actors in the Godzilla suit being silly. Now the series handles the silly concept I think as bad as well as anyone could. Godzilla looks different between movies because he's actively mutating, and the people in the other suits also get turned into monsters and are all being made in attempts to avoid getting affected by his radioactive bite, but it doesn't work, all while Toho are evil and make money off of Godzilla movies because they're popular. I can see some interesting development for the man in the suit's character, like say Manila was sent in because it was believed he wouldn't harm a child, but then he does, and the reason he seems protective over Manila in later movies is because he genuinely regrets causing harm to a Japanese youth because he didn't know it was a child in there, and he believes that it's his right to protect him after what he did. Maybe Mechagodzilla was created out of actual armor to try and keep him from being affected, and it actually works at first, with them being able to avoid the actor from being harmed, which is why a second film was made right after, but during the second one, the man in the suit found a way to fuck him up, and that ended the Showa era of films. Maybe Destroy All Monsters was made in an attempt to lure all of the different suit monsters Goji made together to kill them all off, with the Karyu being some kind of explosive made to take them all out. Maybe the King Ghidorah suit was actually a hero during this era and helped Toho, but after being beaten down while filming Destroy All Monsters, he either came to hate Toho for not helping when he was getting ganged up on, which is why in the other films he's there to sabotage their work, or maybe he just comes to hate Goji personally and becomes his rival out of a bitter hatred of the man in the suit, which is why their fights are so vicious, and his last appearance in the Showa era is his last because the Goji believed that he slaughtered him in that fight, like he beat him to a bloody pulp, but Ghidorah comes back in the Heisei era because the guy survived. I definitely think there are plenty of creative ways this could go, and I think that's the real draw to me personally. I don't find this scary because it's so dumb, but what I do like is the ability to recontextualize the movies in the Showa era around this character, and how they try to manipulate him for their monetary gain while trying to limit the damage he does. I do like the series, this is what I like most about it, and I think it could be interesting. But there is one huge problem that is not the silliness of the concept that takes away from it, and I hate to say it because it feels petty, but the constant spelling and grammatical errors take away a lot from the experience. I said earlier that with a genre that inherently draws you in to want to pay attention to every little detail and pick apart all the clues given to piece together a full story from nothing but pieces, any mistake is going to get picked up on. Now, one or two of these fine, it might add to the idea that these are being hastily written by a person, but some of them just come across as clunky lines or weird errors that don't feel right. It's very distracting after long enough because not one episode goes by without them. Now, I don't know unknowingly, perhaps they are like the Surreal broadcast creator, someone whose first language is not English. Maybe their first language is English but they struggle with spelling and grammar for whatever reason. Either is fine, and none is fine too, maybe they just fuck up every now and again. But I think the series needs to be passed through one or two people to double check on spelling problems and grammar to prevent these kinds of issues. As it is, I don't dislike the man in the suit, but I think it could be so much more, and I think it will become so much more, as more of the Showa films get recontextualized into the story. Like hell, what's next as of writing this? Invasion of Astro Monster could be a film that came about as a result of the Ghidorah actor violently lashing out the man in the suit. Ebirah could play into the story of it being originally a Kong movie. They could say that the reason it's not a Kong movie is because the man in the suit killed the Kong actor previously, and the reason he's so docile in the movie is because the man in the suit wants to ruin the film out of spite for it originally being a Kong movie. And the reason he's so brutal at dismembering Ebirah is because he's angry at his origins as a Kong film villain. Son of Godzilla I suggest an idea for already. Hell, maybe instead they'll have the kid be the one that snapped the photo of the man in the suit in that earlier episode. We can say that Toho hired the kid who took the photo in the earlier episode so that the man in the suit could mutate him and he wouldn't be able to talk about what happened anymore. and the man in the suit realizes he's been manipulated and decides to take care of the kid because he sees him as a victim like himself. There's plenty of potential here, I just hope Unknowingly plays into it. For now, I think an A tier is fitting. It's a good series, and I think it could be great depending on how Unknowingly plays into the creative potential of what they set up here, and makes a graceful transition into the Heisei Millennium eras. Hell, it'd be cool if the reason that the 1998 Godzilla CGI is so bad is because the original suit actor got killed by the man in the suit. You know, there was a suit actor, so that they rushed the CGI and the animatronics in the movie, and the reason the man in the suit didn't go further and slaughtered the entire production is because Toho promised to make the Millennium era for him. And maybe GMK is just like a film set where the man in the suit was in a blind fucking rage. And maybe the Monsterverse and onward stuff not having suit actors is because they found a way to kill the man in the suit during the filming of Final Wars, or even they were able to somehow placate him, and they don't want to risk any more man in the suits happening, so they rely on CGI in the Monsterverse and onward. Who knows? Eventide Media Center, the last entry of Aidan chicks to make it into this video. This one is an interesting one. It's an anthology series like Gemini Home Entertainment, but one that truly feels like an anthology. Each episode is a mostly unconnected tape about a strange happening that occurred in the world of the series. From a giant awakening due to excavation efforts, to a kaiju plant being created to eat people and turn them into protein supplements, to a lighthouse being possessed by a supernatural force and disappearing people with its purple light, to a snuff film of a spider attack being disguised as a cliché monster movie of the era. It's a very interesting series because nothing is connected to each other. They each tell their own fun little story. It's often silly. The non-canon episode with the big fuck-off fish is a highlight to me because of how goofy it ends up looking. I actually really liked Eventide because each episode was its own fun little short tale. While I was pretty much never spooked, I thought it showed a good degree of creativity. Every creature, aside from the two that are very big humanoids, was quite creative and unique from one another. It made every episode exciting to watch because you never quite knew what was going on. And while it does make a binge watch a little less interesting, and overall I can see it just being less interesting for some without an overarching story, I think there's value to it as an anthology series, and I wish that Aidan continued it. I don't want to talk much about the drama, it's long done and dusted by this point. Yes, I agree he didn't need to add what he did at the end of the last episode. Yes, I think the death threats and personal attacks on his character were too far a response. Yes, I think nuking all of his content was too big an overreaction. Nobody was 100% in the right in that situation, but it is a shame that the series ended where it did. I still think personally I'd give this one an A tier. If watched at the right pace, it's nice to just get a series as a bunch of small unconnected stories not requiring any context. You don't have to read too far into these to piece together a narrative. Each episode can be watched in essentially any order if you just feel like having a short 6-minute fun analog horror fix. The most amusing thing about the Walten Files is that I genuinely think it tells a more compelling story with greater usage of horror than its inspiration, Five Nights at Freddy's. I've not seen many FNAF-inspired works that aren't fan games, but Walten Files is the one that will for a while now, I think, be the one that immediately comes to mind. Comprising of only a few episodes and going the Mandela Catalogue style of making them start off easily consumable and then becoming 40-minute long film serials, the Walten Files tells a story of a restaurant chain called Bond's Burgers that reopened one day directly on the side of Shit Creek. People went missing, some died in tragic accidents, and the animatronic of the lead main man himself, Bond, became a horrific murder bot. The Walten Files, I think, stretches the definition of analog horror sometimes. In many ways, you'd almost want to consider it an animated horror series, kind of like Boysvert, which I considered for this list but didn't add on. If I did, it would probably be an A tier though. But with the animated scenes that aren't necessarily analog only coming into play in the latest episode really, and not much in the earlier ones, I guess you could say it just continued taking inspiration from Mandela Catalogue, starting analog and slowly becoming short film. What I think Walten Files does best though is characterization. For as minimal as we really get to see the characters of Felix and Sophie, I become very invested in them. Sophie is an entertaining character to follow, but Felix really is the real show stealer here. While FNAF had a great villain initially with William Afton, who slowly became less and less interesting as they revealed more about him, and he turned to a cliche immortality-seeking super genius who knew everything ever and planned ahead like he was Dr. fucking Doom, the more you know about Felix Kranken, the more compelling he becomes. Felix is a villain who absolutely was and is in the wrong. He got 2 children killed in a car accident because he got drunk the night he was supposed to be driving them home. Yet the way the actor, the writing, and the portrayal of him sells his genuine despair, grief, and guilt over it it does a lot to make him someone you care about as a character. For as horrific as his fuck up was and how much wrong he did, he genuinely hates himself for getting those kids killed. He ruined his friendship with their parents, and he didn't even notice until then how his drinking problem had ruined his life. It's an unsettlingly real portrayal of how people with addictions may not ever realize their problem until they do something they can't take back. At that point, even if they get off their addiction, the ramifications can haunt them for a long time to come. While the human characters are personally what compels me to want to watch, it's notable as well how much better the animatronics are handled than FNAF 2. I don't want to come across like I hate FNAF either, despite its nowadays legendary meme status and how hard it flew down the staircase. I still really care about the series, but no version of any of the animatronics unsettles me like Bond does. Not just for the design, because to some extent I think Bond can sometimes look like the Nightmare animatronics in the sense of trying too hard to be scary, but in the sense of actually knowing who he is as a character, seeing what he does, hearing his voice, how he rationalizes his actions, seeing him mutilate people and stuff them into suits, making the animatronics actually the main threat. But also, Walten Files lets us have some sort of understanding of the people who were stuffed into the animatronic suits. While FNAF has the genuinely interesting idea of not telling us who's in the suits for a long time, so it's left kind of ambiguous and like a mystery, Walten Files doesn't do that. We know some of the people who are in possession of the animatronics. It adds a lot of tragedy, sorrow, and interest in them as individuals. Characters that we knew or come to know later have been killed and stuffed into these suits, and we know who they are. With the exception of Bond, who is left a mystery as to who really is inside that suit, a lot of the others have this sort of feeling of, yes, they're scary and threatening, but you also feel bad for them because you know who the characters are. It's not that innate, oh, a dead child is in there, so I feel bad because I hate seeing dead children. It's a more personal feeling of, I hate seeing this character that I kind of enjoyed for their brief existence turned into a monster. Walten Files does the template of giving you just a little bit of information with each installment to answer questions while also asking new ones in a way that is interesting and engaging. I want to know what happens next, what Bond's plan is, what Sophie's going to do next. It's a series that I think, for as few episodes as it has, does a lot with them. And the improvement in animation, as well as just how unique that animation is in style and aesthetic, makes it stand out immensely. The animation in the latest episode is so good. The scene with Felix, the scene with Bond killing that girl, those scenes could not have been done if the animation didn't kick up the way it did, and I think the series is definitely better for it. I was going to put this in A tier, but I think I've honestly talked myself into giving it an S tier. Walten Files is genuinely fantastic, and I can't wait for more.
Displays online, safety restraints in place.
Looks good. Come on back.
The Genesis Index wasn't originally on here. I found out that something I was told was a series was actually just a movie, and had to replace it with something. This series is ongoing. They will likely put out 2 more episodes by the time I get to finishing this video. So, okay. My plan was to come back to this now and again over time, and then edit that in one block so you won't notice. This was originally like up in the first 10, but between then and here, 1 episode has come out during the editing, not even during the writing and recording, during the editing. And thankfully I held off from recording this, and that was En Route, which just dropped like a day ago. Yeah, the Genesis Index is about a group of assholes doing some experiments that eventually causes shit to happen. The best I can explain it, because not all the details are available, but what is there is pretty good so far. There's an intrigue as to what the story is and where it's going, and I'm curious. The first few episodes they have are fairly solid. The latest as of writing this was particularly neat. The latest as of recording this is another dashcam one, but it does add to the story. I was hoping I'd have more to say, but so far, it's in its infancy, so I cannot even rank it. I'm giving it the Covenant ranking because I'll have to give it time and decide once more of it's out. For those of you keeping count, this is entry 50, but actually, consider this a bonus, entry 49.5. Genesis Index, I expected to have a bit more to it because I gave it over a month since I first saw it to put out the next episodes, but obviously the creator has been busy. So I'm adding a 51st extra entry here, because I don't know how much the oldest view actually counts as analog horror. It's found footage in some sense, but also a lot of not at all found footage, just short film segments. And unlike No Through Road, there's no establishment of this being retrieved from tapes either. It's just the guy's recording. And it's good. I can't call it amazing or anything because it really amounts to a guy finds a hole in the ground with a 1 billion millimeter long staircase leading to an abandoned underground mall. He walks around for a bit, gets chased by a giant statue, falls off a ledge and dies of bum fart. There's a later video that shows him having survived somehow, getting out, and then hilariously the giant just escapes and chases after him. For as simple as it is, it's really good, I think. It does a great job of showing the innate fear I think there is in exploring an abandoned area. Dead, silent locations where you're not sure if any little sound you may hear is someone being there or not. The moist, critical giant is a really endearing design and made about as scary as I think is possible. And obviously, holy shit, the rendering is so good. There's like 1 or 2 spotty elements that make you go, oh yeah, this is in Blender, isn't it? Across the whole 30-40 minute long video. Holy fuck, does it look so good. It's so good. Yeah, that was the quick oldest view segment. A tier, very entertaining, and looks visually outstanding. And here we are, the final stop. The big kahuna of big kahunas. Marble Hornets. When tracing back analog horror far enough, eventually you'll land on Marble Hornets. Of course, it's not the only progenitor. The history of analog horror is a long and storied one in the sense of inspirations and predecessors. That's right, your brief video essay backstory segment is at the end of the video this time. The earliest logical stop is Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez, who found that in their opinion, paranormal phenomena documentaries scared them more than actual horror films. Combining the two things, they created the Blair Witch Project. The two created one of the most important found footage films, pretty much generating the boom of found footage horror films throughout the 2000s and 2010s. Obviously, they weren't the first in the genre, with movies like Guinea Pig, Devil's Experiment, Cannibal, Word I Cannot Say, and The Connection, which isn't a horror film but is one of the oldest out there. Even then, the narrative technique of telling a story through not just the first person, but the lens of unfiction narrative, where the book is treated in-universe as being the writings of one of the major characters, has its roots in works like Dracula, The Call of Cthulhu, and Frankenstein or the modern-day Prometheus. But Blair Witch Project is particularly notable for being the template that a lot of found footage films onwards would emulate, either Blair Witch or Paranormal Activity, and also for having its own media campaign resembling an ARG. I've mentioned ARGs a few times before, but some of you may be wondering what the difference is between an analog horror series and an ARG. An ARG, or alternate reality game, is characterized by interactivity with the viewers. They have a lot of crossover with analog horror, both being quite cryptic and inspiring theory crafting, and they're both unfiction narrative structures that treat themselves as if they're real. That's what unfiction is. However, analog horror is most notable as being characterized by a particular framing device. Usually, analog horror is portrayed through the means of analog broadcasts, recovered VHS tapes, and found footage. ARGs are not limited to this. They can have much larger reach, often spanning multiple websites and multiple means of conveying story, such as often social media accounts role-playing as major characters. There's also a lot of puzzles. Plenty of puzzles. Now, it's not to say that analog horror can't have puzzles. There are times where the line can be a bit fuzzy, CHSS being by far the best example, being as it is definitively both genres. There's also the final line between found footage and analog horror. At what point are they one or the other? It's really just that found footage is a part of what can be used in analog horror. What makes a work like No Through Road, a series partially but not directly inspired by the Blair Witch Project, considered analog horror is the framing device of not just being a camera that was found, but a VHS tape that gets played. As a lot of analog horror broadcasts are told through the idea of being VHS recordings of those old broadcasts. The VHS aesthetic is intrinsic to analog horror's bread and butter. ARGs and found footage in general are not inherently limited to that. Anyway, back to Blair Witch Project. This movie came around with a very notable campaign akin to an ARG. Again, it's not the first of its kind there either. Proto-examples such as Wizards of the Coast Webrunner and the even older Ong's Hat exist, but Blair Witch helped to inspire other films to attend more elaborate ARG forms of promotional campaigns. Now we can pivot a bit to the internet at large and look at creepypasta. Creepypasta is a vague thing, pretty much a blanket term for a bit of written stuff on the internet that's probably meant to be scary. This is widely credited as truly beginning with Ted the Caver, our previously mentioned story, published on an Angelfire website that pioneered truly internet-exclusive storytelling, through the means of hyperlinks and real-time updates that were simply not possible through previous means, not only adding to the horror by taking the unfiction format to its extreme through the real-time nature, but also by giving that apprehension of what might appear when a reader clicks on a hyperlink. But the creepypasta genre most associated with analog horror is unsurprisingly the lost episode genre. Stories like Self-Inflicted Cessation Mouse and Squidward's Desire to Stop. Some also like to put Ben Drowned here, but I hate to break it to you that Ben Drown's original creepypasta is just part 1 to a larger ARG spanning a very large scope that ended in 2020. I didn't know it lasted that long. Another thing often referred to as creepypasta when it shouldn't be is Slenderman. Originating on June 10th, 2009 as 2 entries in a Something Awful Forums Photoshop contest, Eric Knudsen, going under the name Victor Surge, created the figure of the Slenderman, who exploded pretty much immediately. The primary inspirations being Stephen King's Mist, Mothman, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, and even his fellow Something Awful creator Zach Parsons' work The Insidious Beast, with Knudsen also minorly crediting Silent Hill, Lovecraft, Phantasm, and the works of William S. Burroughs. Despite how much he exploded, there wasn't much video presence for Slenderman until Troy Wagner and Joseph Delage? I don't actually know, decided to change that, using their massive $500 budget to create the first season of Marble Hornets. Combining the concept of Slenderman with a found footage style, told through the framing device of tapes and done as a wider spanning ARG, this is Marble Hornets. Marble Hornets is by far the longest series here, and I'd say the single most important show in the list, with only maybe Local 58 being competition, and Ted the Caver if you want to count the original story. I intend to go through this season by season and then talk about how I feel about the show overall because it's a special boy, shut up. Marble Hornets Season 1 is a fantastic beginning to this story, and honestly fantastic as a story in its own right. I believe there was not originally any intentions of making it longer, so it working on its own makes sense. The show tells us a story of a student film by the name of Marble Hornets that was being produced by one Alex Crayley, who abruptly stopped the production a few months in. Our point of view character, Jay Merrick, kept the raw footage even after Alex ceased contact and left. Years later, Jay attempts watching the tapes and uploading them online, wherein he slowly uncovers a darker, unseen presence from the filming, the haunting of an entity known as the Operator, as well as growing emotional instability and aggression from Alex, constant glitches in the footage, and events caught on camera that he was present for but doesn't remember. Marble Hornets immediately puts its best foot forward with its presentation. Due to the low budget, Marble Hornets doesn't have any of the high-tech and high-quality camera and microphone technology that a lot of found footage work stupidly use. Just like No Through Road, it feels as cheap as it should. They're recording using shitty, cheap enough cameras a student making a student film would have, and the acting all flows and has the right tone and inflections to feel like a real conversation. Some of what they do, as someone who has travelled long distances to scout locations for my own silly live action works, genuinely spoke to me even more on this rewatch than when I first watched the series. It's like, yeah, that's something I do. That relatability adds to the horror of it, and in general, Marble Hornets preys on a lot of fears that give it the vibe it does. It does not limit itself to the innate supernatural spookiness of the Operator, but ties him to relatable feelings and fears that enhance the terror. The main one is stalking. The fear of someone you don't know following you, watching you, breaking into your home, then the greater fear of not knowing that they were doing that. The idea of filming yourself doing stuff and then seeing in the background someone you don't recognize watching you, then seeing them again and again. And that is the idea of lost memories. Our memories are naturally fucky. There are things you don't remember about your past. And how would you feel if you looked back on recordings of what happened and see things you never noticed? That would make it worse. And furthermore, how can both of these things affect our mental health as individuals? While things like Jay and Alex's lost sleep, lost memories, and mental decline are caused by the Operator's supernatural abilities, you could also read it as the Operator's abilities exasperating what would naturally happen in real life. In real life, you would also likely lose sleep. You will forget things, and remembering them would cause you distress, and your mental health will take a blow the longer it goes on. That fear adds to what the Operator is. Being unseen and connected to relatable things inspires thoughts of, what if the Operator or something like it exists and is following me? What if there is some presence, supernatural or natural, that you may not notice, causing you to feel paranoid, lose sleep, and develop anxiety, depression, causing you to lash out due to the mental strain it puts on you? That is what makes the Operator scary. Slenderman these days in general is not scary, and arguably his physical appearance was never even that scary, being as he is a tall white dude with a good sense of wardrobe. But the Operator is terrifying, at least to me, because he represents very real and very paranoia-inducing feelings and ideas. The Operator isn't real, and nothing that's supernatural like him has ever shown up to prove itself existing to my life. But who's to say that I don't have a stalker I've never noticed? Who's to say if I looked at old footage of my life, I wouldn't see someone following me years ago that I never saw? Who's to say there isn't somebody who breaks into my room or even watches me through a window at night without my knowledge? Marble Hornets uses him perfectly, and he adds to the already engaging story. Seeing these people just acting like people gives me a desire to see where the story goes that few other series can attest to. Seeing Jay explore his history and these mysteries, learning the truth of what happened and seeing new questions pop up. Something about the series gives it a great balance as well between having questions with answers that you need to engage in the AIG element for, but enough storytelling in it on its own to not require the AIG element to enjoy. You don't need to engage in the ARG to enjoy the base story, something I can't even say for previous ARG CHSS. You can just enjoy and engage in this story as a found footage tale with weird cryptic puzzle videos given by this To The Ark fellow. But engaging in the ARG, the Twitter, finding the clues and puzzle pieces, solving the mysteries, it adds to the experience. But because you don't need to, ARG FOMO is not nearly as strong with Marble Hornets as it is with some other ARGs. The first season ends with Jay finding a tape that shows Alex and his girlfriend encountering the operator in their own home, and Jay promising to find Alex. Season 1 was fantastic, and Season 2 is, in my opinion, not as good, but still very solid. Season 2 begins with an extremely strong start. Jay wakes up in an unknown hotel room in the middle of buttfuck nowhere. He has no memories of the past few months, and a camera is strapped to his chest. He quickly finds out that the woman in the next room over, Jessica, is suffering the same memory loss and confusion as him. He eventually finds several tapes and a hard drive with footage of what he did in those lost months. An amazing opening for the season. It sets up the same lost memory narrative as the first season, but in a different way. Now the mystery isn't just what happened in the past, but what led Jay to be where he is right now. Who is Jessica? What happened with his search for Alex? We aren't just left with a mystery of what happened in general, but the mystery of what happened in relation to a specific goal that we know Jay had. Over the course of the season, we see Jay's reunion with Alex, their attempts to work together, supposedly. You see, the season builds up a growing distrust between Alex and Jay, down to Jay breaking into Alex's home at one point but being chased out by the operator spawning in. All building up to the reveal that Alex killed an innocent man. That's how far gone Alex was the whole time. Jay breaks into Alex's home a second time and finds evidence that Alex wasn't just killing people, but luring them into abandoned areas for the operator to kill them and take them. Jessica and Jay were even lured by Alex, who attempts to take them out himself with a big gun until he's stopped. The season ends with Jay back where he started, now once again looking for Alex, but not to get his help anymore, and seeing Tim, who is a character that earlier was revealed to be one of the hooded figures I've not mentioned that have been getting involved with the series overall, and Jay decides to pursue. Season 2 is still very good. The plot reveals are good, the mystery is generally given satisfying answers, and has a lot of major plot points. While some might look at how it takes a story from Jay wants to find Alex to Jay wants to find Alex, and assume that it's a filler season, it's anything but. The season may not inherently progress Jay's goals very far, but it's extremely important in more or less concluding the mysteries of what happened during the Marble Hornets shoot. It gives us full details to the extent of who Alex is, it introduces Jessica, Woody's identity is revealed, him being one of the members of the To The Ark channel, which is the channel that uploads response videos to main Marble Hornets videos, which are the ones that contain the puzzles if you're wondering. It reveals a lot of important details, and has a lot of improvements to Season 1. Being a lot more character focused, which I like because I actually like the characters. Alex is a very engaging antagonist, Jay's a very likable protagonist, and I quite like pretty much everyone else who's important. And the horror is still there, though in my opinion not as scary as the first season. It's still a very solid piece of work though. But, as I said, it falls short of Season 1 to me for a few reasons. For one, the big question set up at the start I don't think is given the most satisfying answer. By that I mean, a few questions are asked, and most are answered well. What happened with the search for Alex? Well, he found him, but Alex turned out to be 100% buttfuck crazy. Who is Jessica? Jessica was connected to Alex's girlfriend Amy and was someone who aimed to help Jay with his problem that led to her getting sucked in too. Why did Jay end up in this hotel? Because he attempted to body slam the operator. Huh? Yeah, that one didn't work for me. It was a bit undercooked as a reveal. In general, the season feels like it has a lot of padding. There's moments I didn't feel were really relevant, and there was a lot of meandering. To an extent, I can forgive this, because it does reflect reality well, and that adds to the realism of the show. Not every day of your life plays a major role in getting you to your goals after all, but it can make it a less interesting watch in general. But then we head into Season 3. Season 3 is to me the peak of the show. It marries the same pacing and horror elements of the first season with the character focus of the second to make an extremely engaging narrative that never left me wanting or bored. Season 3's narrative begins and focuses on Jay's investigations alongside Tim, or the mask guy from earlier seasons. It'd be hard to summarize what happens without oversimplifying things, but the story deals with the two learning the answers to major questions: the identity of the hooded man, the motivations of Alex, the truth behind Tim and his history, what happened to Jessica kind of. The two work together, Tim learns the truth and gives Jay the wombo combo, they make up and start working together again. It's just entertaining. These two have great chemistry, and it highlights how much Jay has changed since the earlier seasons. Tim is also my favorite character in the series due to, this season, and man, his actor, Tim, does such a good job. Tim has so many great scenes, but I think the one that everyone turns to is naturally the parking lot breakdown. Just listen to some of this.
Imagine waking up one morning with your leg broken and no memory whatsoever of that happening. Think about that. Imagine not being able to keep a job because you call into work one morning and they say, "Oh, we're sorry, we had to fire you because we haven't heard from you for the last 3 weeks." But then suddenly it stops and I start getting better and I can hold steady work and I can function like a normal human being for once in my life, and then suddenly you show up putting a camera in my face, bringing back old memories like it couldn't possibly have any effect on anybody else.
That delivery is so raw and genuine, it feels so real. Alex and Jay also have well-delivered scenes, and Alex came around to being a genuinely interesting antagonist as well. It's hard to really say Jay is bad too, but he does go too far near the end, but seeing how far he's gone and how much this has destroyed him for where he was at the start does make it understandable. Unlike Alex, who had a few years to deal with this prior to the story beginning, and Tim, who has dealt with this for his entire life, Jay literally jumped into the deep end without realizing, and has only had these few years during the show's run of dealing with the operator and his shit. It makes sense that he gets broken down the most. The show's new character focus does a lot to really add to the horror. While in season 1 the horror was mostly due to the operator Spooky, this season also includes a lot of horror of just, I like these characters and I don't want them to get harmed. Like, entry, I believe 79 in general, is so nerve-wracking to me because I don't want either of Jay or Tim injured, and they're both against one another for various reasons right now. Then there's the fact that Jay actually fucking dies. That's right, the protagonist of the series dies before the end and Tim has to take the reins and finish it. And it's good. Sure, Jay's death doesn't get the focus it could have, but with how much Marble Hornets is meant to be an unfiction story reflecting reality, I understand why Tim wouldn't take time out of his day to film his mourning and his grief, instead of mourning and grieving in his own time and using his camera to film on his objective, taking out Alex. The fact that they even got any sign of him grieving in the story naturally feeling like it should be there is great too. And the ending is simply great. Finishing on the silent shot of Tim driving, turning the camera to face the crossroads, leaving it on that ambiguous finish. Sure, there are a lot of still unanswered questions, but most of the important ones are answered, which is what matters to me. Those other questions aren't the most important elements of the show, meaning for a casual viewer, the ending is fantastic, and for a dedicated puzzle solver and theory crafter, it leaves enough questions unanswered to let them continue coming up with ideas and theories long after the show ended. Finishing Marble Hornets again, I think the biggest takeaway from me this time was that Slender Man was never scary. The operator was scary. The operator, this strange unknowable being that just standing near is nigh impossible, this thing that follows you anywhere and brings you to madness. Some of the least scary elements of the Slenderman mythos, like the cartoony tentacles or the silly proxies, aren't present in the series. The operator is just the innate creepiness of a tall, almost human enough person who causes distortion in both the mind and technology. Just trying to work together with fellow victims against the operator is pretty much impossible, because he turns them against one another. The operator is a master manipulator, an intelligent manipulator, and that makes him scary to me. While he has these supernatural powers, those just add to the unknowable element, but the creepiest elements aren't limited to the unreal and supernatural. There's a genuine, relatable scariness to someone who manipulates friends against one another, stalks them for long stretches of their life, convinces them to do things that causes harm to themselves, like take medication and smoke excessively. And by medication, I mean like, excessive medication. A normal person who does what the operator does would still be scary, and that's what makes him so terrifying to me. You can see how someone like that could exist in real life in terms of his actions, with the supernatural element adding a degree of unknowable eldritch nature to him that gives the viewer a feeling of, but I cannot prove this thing isn't real and watching me right now. To me, Marble Hornets is a testament to what passionate creators can do with a dream and a budget made from 2 paydays worth of cash. Marble Hornets is an easy S tier. It's my favorite work of this video and an all-time classic. And that was my look at 50 or 51 analog horror series. Here is the ranking in order of my favorite to least favorite, and here are my closing thoughts. To me, analog horror is not that scary as a form of horror. Even with the relatability of being someone who has experienced analog television for most of his life, I just think that most of the time, most series don't make it scary. But what I do find interesting is analog storytelling. The unfiction narrative akin to found footage, but on a much larger scale. Found footage often focuses on a small piece of the action, a relatively small fraction of a larger scale narrative and story. Analog horror can't do that, but due to connecting directly to larger broadcast, it is able to expand itself to tell a wider story across a country or even the whole world. Ignoring my favorite two on this ranking, Marble Hornets and No Through Road, as they are more prototypical analog horror that acts more like found footage stories that set up some of the frameworks for the tropes, and Local 58, which is unexplainably creepy to me, most of my favorites aren't strictly limited to horror. They are examples of fantastical science fiction storytelling or war mystery stories told through an analog means. They can be comedy, they can be sci-fi, they can be conspiracy thrillers. There are great horror series on this list, ones that I think excel because of their horror. But what I want to see more of is analog media being used to tell stories that aren't strictly horror focused. Horror can remain an element, keeping things unsettling and spooky, but we can have more than just horror in this style. Science fiction is one that gets used a lot, but always in a sort of cosmic horror sense. Where are the stories that are like District 9 adjacent humans and aliens interacting narratives? There could be some interesting stories told, if not limiting them to just how do I make a scary though. Still, I don't think the landscape is as bad or dead as some people think. Is analog horror oversaturated? Absolutely. There are still more series I could have talked about that I didn't, and there are a lot of ones directly based on existing franchises as well that I didn't feel like covering in this video. But due to the ease of access, it was only natural analog horror would become oversaturated, in the same way as creepypasta and found footage. Things that require little to no budget to do halfway competently will naturally draw in tons of people with creative ideas, or even just derivative ideas that they feel like expressing in their own way, to give a shot at portraying their ideas. In this video, I've gotten to see a lot of different interesting ways to tell stories, and I think actually telling a story is what most analog horrors need to focus on. Make me care about the world, and I might be scared for it. In the same way that found footage needs to make me care about the characters to be scared for them. But yeah, that's all for me today, because that's just... God, that's a long video, isn't it? I hope you enjoyed. Let me know down below what you think of analog horrors, including any in this video, and yeah, have a good one, folks. Whew, that was a hell of a video, wasn't it? I'm not going to hold you for too long here. That was... It's quite long. This is like the length of a Star Wars film, but I hope you guys all enjoyed. I hope you, yeah, enjoyed. That's really it. Tell me what you enjoy. Yeah, English. Tell me what you thought below. Tell me what analog horrors you like, what analog horrors you don't like, what you agree or disagree with. You know, what other analog horrors are good enough that maybe I should pay attention to them. Don't bring up FNAF VHS, either of them. Don't. Because I guess I've got a video that would include them. But yeah. So thank you to all my Patreons scrolling by right now. You guys really do help to keep me afloat. You can join Patreon if you want to support me. Link in the description. You can see this video early on Patreon, and you'll see other videos early. That's really the only reward now, except that you can also get access to the Discord and make me say stupid things. People always ask me about stuff like they always ask me where the Discord is. That's where the Discord is, because the other one is I killed it. So yeah, you can make me say stupid stuff like the following. Let's just see what happens. Boo! Because you're in for a more than an uncomfortable feeling. The mighty mass of bones lumbers to the attack. Oh yeah, land of the free? So why can't I rinse my balls in the Burger King soda dispenser? The raw-eaten cooters outside my house at 3 in the morning. Crikey, here, have a look at this salty candy. Its wrapper looks like it's made of pure feathers. Look out, it has a taste of a gummy bear vat. It's weird because it's shaped like an elongated muskrat. Crikey, mate. Hello, I'm Jeff the Killer, and I'm going to Jeff the Killer you. Welcome to prime time, bitch! See, I don't know the bit that Biff's trying to hit me with here. I don't know if I trust him. I'm so glad that I'm completely alone right now, I say to myself. No, you're not, said Knife Guy. Well, that was all that. Wasn't that so entertaining? They gave me more to work with when it was about Death Battle, because... Of course they did. Yeah, alright. Goodbye. Have a good one, folks.